The most feared man in Chicago stood frozen in his own bedroom. Not because someone held a gun to his head, but because the woman he just married whispered four words that cracked something inside him he didn't know still existed. Please, don't touch me. Her voice broke like glass hitting concrete. And when Lucien Vexley looked closer, past the ivory gown and the flawless makeup, he saw bruises. Old ones, deep ones, the kind that don't come from accidents. Someone had destroyed this woman long before he ever put a ring on her finger, and that someone was still out there. If you want to know what happens when a monster falls for the one person he can't protect with violence, stay until the very end. Hit that like button, drop a comment with the city you're watching from, so I can see how far this story travels. Now let me take you back to the beginning. The wedding was a performance, and everybody in that ballroom knew it. 300 guests packed the grand hall of Blackthorn Manor on a Tuesday night in November. Politicians sat next to drug traffickers. Judges shook hands with arms dealers. Women in couture dresses laughed too loud and drank too fast because the alternative was acknowledging what this place really was. A cathedral built on blood money, disguised with gold trim and imported marble. Lucien Vexley stood at the altar with his jaw tight and his hands behind his back. 34 years old, 6'2". A face that might have been handsome once, but now carried the kind of hardness that made people cross the street. His knuckles were scarred from a decade of conversations that ended with someone on the floor. His dark eyes moved across the room with the precision of a man who cataloged exits and threats before he registered human faces. He didn't smile when the bride appeared. Seraphina Vale walked down the aisle alone. No father to give her away. No bridesmaids trailing behind. Just a woman in a custom ivory gown moving through a sea of wolves with her chin raised and her spine so rigid it looked like it might snap. She was 27, pale skin, dark auburn hair pinned back with a severity that aged her. Beautiful in the way a statue is beautiful. Cold, distant, deliberately unreachable. The photographers later said she was the most stunning bride they'd ever shot. They also said she never once looked her groom in the eye. The ceremony lasted 9 minutes. No personalized vows. No tears of joy. No kiss that lingered. Lucien pressed his lips to hers for exactly 1 second, a business handshake disguised as intimacy. And she didn't flinch, but her entire body locked up like someone bracing for a car crash. The guests applauded anyway, because this wasn't about love. This was about territory. The Vale family controlled the eastern seaboard's shipping routes, ports, cargo lanes, customs officials on every payroll that mattered. The Vexley Syndicate owned Chicago and everything west of it. For 3 years, a quiet war had been bleeding both sides dry. Assassinations dressed as accidents. Warehouses torched at midnight, bodies showing up in the Fox River with their teeth removed so dental records meant nothing. Marcus Vale, Seraphina's uncle and the head of her family, had proposed the solution over a dinner that cost more than most people made in a year. One marriage, one alliance, the war ends, the empires merge. Everyone profits. Lucien had said yes because the math made sense. He never asked Seraphina what she wanted. Nobody did. The reception dragged past midnight. Lucien worked the room like a politician running for office in a country that didn't hold elections. He shook hands. He received congratulations with a nod that said nothing. He drank bourbon slowly because Lucien Vexley never got drunk in public. Not once, not ever. Control was the only religion he practiced. His right-hand man, Victor Koslov, stayed 3 steps behind him all night. Victor was 51, built like a concrete wall, with a face that looked like it had been assembled from spare parts after a bar fight. He'd been with Lucien since the beginning, since the South Side days when Lucien was just another angry kid with dead parents and a talent for making people afraid. Around 1 in the morning, Victor leaned close while Lucien watched the last guests stumble toward their cars. She hasn't eaten anything. Lucien glanced across the room. Seraphina sat alone at the head table, her plate untouched, her champagne glass full. She stared at the tablecloth like she was memorizing the thread count to keep herself from thinking about what came next. "She's nervous," Lucien said. Victor shook his head slowly. "That ain't nervous, boss. That's something else." Lucien didn't respond. He finished his bourbon and set the glass down carefully, the way he did everything, with a deliberation that made people wonder whether the gesture was a choice or a warning. Then he walked toward his bride. The penthouse suite occupied the entire top floor of Blackthorn Manor. Floor-to-ceiling windows framed the Chicago skyline like a painting nobody asked for. Candles had been lit by the staff, dozens of them, scattered across every surface in some interior designer's idea of romance. The bed was enormous, draped in white silk, positioned to face the city lights like a stage. Seraphina entered first. She stood near the window with her back to the door, and Lucien could see the reflection of her face in the glass. Her jaw was clenched, her eyes were wet. Her fingers gripped the windowsill so hard her knuckles had gone white. Lucien closed the door behind them, and the sound made her shoulders jump. He noticed. He loosened his tie, pulled it off, dropped it on the dresser, unbuttoned his collar, rolled his sleeves halfway up his forearms because the room was too warm and the candles were making it worse. He moved toward the minibar, poured 2 glasses of water and set one on the table near where she stood. "Drink something," he said. Not a command, not a request. Somewhere in between. She didn't move. Lucien took a drink from his own glass and leaned against the wall 6 feet from her. He studied her the way he studied everything, with patience that most people mistook for cruelty. "I'm going to take a shower," he said after a moment. "When I come out, we can talk about how this works." He stepped toward the bathroom, passing close enough that his hand brushed her arm as he moved. And Seraphina flinched so hard she stumbled backward. Her heel caught on the edge of the rug. She caught herself on the windowsill, but the champagne flute fell and shattered against the marble floor. The sound cracked through the room like a gunshot, and she dropped to her knees, not to clean it up, but because her legs gave out. "Please, don't touch me." The whisper barely made it past her lips. Lucien froze mid-step. He'd heard begging before. He'd heard men cry and scream and promise anything to make the pain stop. He'd heard fear in every pitch the human voice could produce. This wasn't any of that. This was something quieter, something older. A sound that came from so deep inside a person, it bypassed language and became just raw survival instinct given syllables. He looked down at her. She was on her knees in a $10,000 wedding gown surrounded by broken glass, shaking so hard the fabric trembled. Her breathing came in short, ragged pulls. Too fast, too shallow. The kind of breathing that meant panic was 10 seconds from becoming a full shutdown. And that's when he saw it. The makeup on her left arm had smeared where she'd grabbed the windowsill. Beneath it, a bruise. Wish green at the edges, meaning it was at least a week old. Not from tonight. Not from him. His eyes moved to her wrists. Thin scars, barely visible unless you knew what you were looking at. Some horizontal, some ragged, some old enough to have faded into silver lines that could be mistaken for nothing if you weren't paying attention. Lucien Vexley was always paying attention. He took one step back. Then another. He lowered himself slowly into the chair across the room, not because he was tired, but because he understood that the most dangerous thing he could do in this moment was stand over her. "I'm sitting down," he said quietly. "I'm not going to touch you. I'm not going to come any closer." She didn't look up. Her breathing was still ragged. "Seraphina." Her name in his mouth seemed to reach her. She raised her head just enough to look at him through wet eyes. "I'm not going to touch you," he repeated. "Not tonight. Not until you say so. Do you understand what I'm telling you?" Something passed across her face. Confusion. Disbelief. The kind of suspicion that comes from learning that every promise is a trap. She nodded once, quickly, like she was agreeing before he changed his mind. Lucien stood up slowly, grabbed a blanket from the bed, and set it on the couch near the window. Then he took a pillow and walked to the other side of the room. "You take the bed. I'll sleep here." She stared at him. "Go to sleep, Seraphina." He lay down on the couch, fully dressed, shoes still on, shirt still buttoned, and turned to face the ceiling. He listened to her breathing slowly, painfully stabilize over the next 20 minutes. He heard her stand, heard the rustle of fabric, heard the bed creak as she climbed in without changing out of the wedding dress. He didn't sleep for a long time, and when he finally did, he dreamed about the bruises. The next morning, Lucien was gone before she woke up. He sat in his office on the 3rd floor of Blackthorn Manor with a cup of black coffee that had gone cold an hour ago. The room was dark, curtains drawn, desk lamp off, only the gray November light leaking through gaps in the heavy fabric. He'd been sitting in the same chair since 5 a.m., staring at the wall, doing something he almost never did, thinking about someone other than himself. Victor knocked twice and entered without waiting. "Morning briefing. The Caruso shipment needs your sign-off. DeLuca's crew wants a sit-down about the West Loop territory. And your new wife's uncle called twice already asking how the night went. Victor paused. His exact words were, I trust the union has been properly consummated. Lucian's jaw flexed. Tell Marcus Vale to mind his own business. Victor raised an eyebrow but said nothing. 20 years working for Lucien had taught him exactly when to push and when to shut his mouth. This was a shut-your-mouth moment. One more thing, Lucien said without looking up. I need everything on Seraphina. Before us. Before the arrangement. Everything. Everything meaning what? Medical records. Travel history. Prior relationships. Anyone she lived with, dated, talked to. I want names, dates, and photographs. Victor studied him. You think she's compromised? Working for someone? No. Then what's this about? Lucien finally looked up. His eyes were flat. The kind of flat that preceded the worst decisions he'd ever made. Someone hurt her, Vic, before us, and I need to know who. Victor's expression didn't change, but something shifted behind his eyes. The kind of micro-reaction that only happened when something genuinely surprised him. I'll have it by Thursday. He had it by Wednesday. The file was thick. 47 pages printed on cream-colored paper, assembled by 3 private investigators who worked exclusively for the Vexley syndicate, and who knew better than to ask questions about why. Lucien read it alone in his office with the door locked. The name that kept appearing was Damien Cross, 38 years old, founder and CEO of a tech company that had gone public 2 years ago, making him worth something north of $900 million. Philanthropist. Regular at charity galas. Board member of 3 nonprofits dedicated to women's health. An irony so vicious Lucien nearly tore the page. Damien Cross and Seraphina Vale had been in a relationship for 4 years. The official story, the one that showed up in magazine profiles and society columns, painted a picture of a glamorous couple living a dream life. Penthouses in Manhattan. Vacations in the south of France. Red carpet appearances where Seraphina smiled and Damien held her waist with the possessive casualness of a man displaying a trophy. The unofficial story was different. 2 emergency room visits documented in the file. The first, a fractured rib, attributed to a fall downstairs. The second, a dislocated shoulder, attributed to a tennis accident. Both treated at private medical facilities that catered to the wealthy and the discreet. Both followed by sizable donations from Cross Industries to the hospitals in question. There were police reports too, 3 of them, all filed and then withdrawn within 48 hours. The officers who handled the cases had all received promotion shortly afterward. One of them now drove a car that cost more than his annual salary. Lucien read every page twice. Then he called in Anton Reyes, his intelligence specialist, a man in his mid-40s who looked more like a high school math teacher than someone who made his living breaking into secure databases and bribing surveillance contractors. I need footage, Lucien said. Private security cameras at every venue Damien Cross attended with Seraphina Vale in the last 4 years. Clubs, restaurants, hotel lobbies, charity events. Anything with a camera that recorded them together. Anton nodded. That's a lot of footage. Then start now. It took 5 days. 5 days of Lucien barely sleeping, barely eating, running the syndicate on autopilot, while Anton compiled hours of grainy security footage on a series of encrypted drives. 5 days during which Seraphina moved through Blackthorn Manor like a ghost wearing expensive clothes, silent, careful, pressing herself against walls when she heard footsteps, eating alone in her room with the door locked. She spoke to no one. The staff noticed. Of course they noticed. Elena, the head housekeeper, a severe woman in her 60s who had worked for the Vexley family since before Lucien was born, reported to Victor that Mrs. Vexley had not used the shower for 2 days, that she folded her clothes with a precision that bordered on obsessive, that she kept the curtains closed at all times and flinched when anyone knocked. Victor passed this information to Lucien, who received it in silence and then went back to watching footage. The first video was from a charity gala in Manhattan, 14 months ago. High-angle security camera, mounted above the bar. Seraphina in a black dress, standing next to Damien, both holding champagne. To any casual observer, they looked perfect. Beautiful couple. Appropriate amount of closeness. Appropriate smiles. But Lucien wasn't a casual observer. He noticed how Seraphina's smile dropped the instant Damien looked away. How she held her champagne glass with both hands like she needed something to grip. How, when Damien leaned in to whisper something, Her entire body went still. Not relaxed, not comfortable, but frozen. The stillness of prey. The second video was worse. A rooftop restaurant. Damien and Seraphina at a private table. The footage was silent but clear. They were arguing, or rather, Damien was talking and Seraphina was shrinking. His hand was on the table, palm down, fingers spread like he was holding the surface in place. Her hands were in her lap, hidden. When he reached across and grabbed her wrist, she didn't pull away. She just closed her eyes. The third video destroyed something inside Lucien that he would never get back. A rooftop party. Summer. Seraphina stood near the railing in a blue dress while Damien held court with a group of investors. At some point, he broke away and walked toward her. The camera caught his face as he leaned in close, smiling, casual, the picture of charm. But his hand was on the back of her neck, squeezing. And Seraphina was crying, silently, tears running down her face while she smiled for the room. Lucien had one of his lip readers analyze the footage. The words came back typed on a single sheet of paper. You belong to me, even if you marry someone else. Lucien sat in his office staring at that sentence for 11 minutes. Then he picked up the whiskey glass on his desk and squeezed until it shattered in his hand. Blood ran between his fingers and dripped onto the file, and he didn't notice. He didn't feel it. The pain in his hand was nothing compared to the thing expanding in his chest. Something darker than anger, older than rage. A feeling he hadn't experienced since he was 16 years old, standing over his father's casket, wondering why nobody had helped. Victor found him 20 minutes later, still bleeding, still staring. Boss, your hand. I'm fine. You're bleeding on a $6,000 desk. Lucien looked down at the blood like he was seeing it for the first time. He grabbed a cloth napkin and wrapped it without urgency. Damien Cross, Lucien said. What about him? Find out where he is. Right now. Tonight. Victor crossed his arms. You want to talk to him? No. Lucien's voice had changed. It had dropped into a register that Victor had only heard a handful of times in 20 years. The register that preceded the kind of decisions that showed up in crime scene photographs. I want to know where he sleeps, where he eats, who protects him, who funds him. I want to know the name of every person who knew what he was doing to her and looked the other way. Victor waited a beat. And then what? Lucien looked at him with eyes that had lost every trace of the calculated control that defined him. And then I'm going to take everything from him. The weeks that followed were the strangest of Lucien's life. By day, he orchestrated the slow, methodical dismantling of Damien Cross's world with the patience of a man building a bomb. He mapped Cross's business connections, his political allies, his financial structure. He identified the weak points, the overextended credit lines, the regulatory shortcuts, the offshore accounts that wouldn't survive scrutiny. He assigned teams to each vulnerability with specific instructions. Don't move yet. Just watch. Wait for my word. By night, he sat outside Seraphina's bedroom door. It started by accident. The first time he was walking past her room at 2 a.m, when he heard something through the door, a sound so small he almost missed it. A whimper. Not loud, not dramatic, just a tiny broken sound that slipped through the gap beneath the door like smoke. He stopped, put his hand against the wood, listened. She was having a nightmare. He could hear the bed shifting, the sheets twisting, her breathing accelerating into the same pattern he'd heard on their wedding night. Fast, shallow, desperate. Every instinct told him to open the door. He'd spent his entire life solving problems with action, with force, with presence. The idea of standing in a hallway doing nothing went against everything he was. But he stayed. He slid down against the wall, pulled a cigarette from his jacket, and lit it. The smoke curled toward the ceiling, and he sat there listening to her fight through a nightmare he couldn't see. In a room he wouldn't enter, against an enemy he hadn't reached yet. The nightmare lasted 40 minutes. When it finally passed, when her breathing slowed and the bed went still, Lucien stubbed out his cigarette on the marble floor and stayed for another hour, just in case. He came back the next night, and the next. By the second week, it wasn't a decision anymore. It was a ritual. 2 a.m., the hallway outside her room, a cigarette. Silence. Sometimes the nightmares came, sometimes they didn't. Either way, he stayed. Elena noticed the cigarette butts outside the door each morning, but said nothing. Victor noticed Lucien's increasing sleep deprivation, but chose his battles. The rest of the household noticed that the most dangerous man in the city had started doing something no one could explain. and they were smart enough not to ask. Seraphina noticed too. It happened on a Thursday night, 3 weeks after the wedding. She'd woken from a dream she couldn't fully remember, something about locked doors and hands around her throat, and she'd sat up gasping, drenched in sweat, gripping the sheets so hard her fingers ached. When the panic faded enough for her to hear past her own heartbeat, she caught it. The smell of cigarette smoke. Faint, drifting under the door. She got out of bed slowly. Her bare feet made no sound on the cold floor. She moved to the door and pressed her ear against it, breathing. Someone was sitting on the other side. She stayed there for a long time, her forehead against the wood, her hand flat on the door, her eyes closed. Not afraid. For the first time in longer than she could remember, not afraid. Just confused. Confused by a man who terrified entire cities but sat in a dark hallway at 2 a.m. because she had bad dreams. She didn't open the door, but she didn't go back to the bed either. She slid down against her side of the wall and sat there, mirroring him, separated by 2 inches of oak, and neither of them said a word. Meanwhile, Lucien's investigation into Damien Cross had turned up something that changed the entire calculation. Anton Reyes came into Lucien's office on a Friday afternoon with a look on his face that Lucien had never seen before. Anton was a man who dealt in facts and data and spoke in the clipped, emotionless language of someone who had trained himself to separate information from feeling. But on this afternoon, his voice had an edge. "You need to see this." He placed a laptop on Lucien's desk. On the screen was a series of financial transfers, large ones, routed through 3 shell companies that all traced back to a single entity registered in the Cayman Islands. "Cross has been funding the Morozov Syndicate," Anton said. Lucien looked up. The Morozov Syndicate was a Russian operation that had been pushing into Vexley territory for the last 18 months. Small moves, a hijacked shipment here, a bribed dock worker there. Annoying but manageable. Lucien had treated it as minor competition. He was wrong. "How much?" Lucien asked. 14 million in the last year alone. And there's more." Anton pulled up another file. "Cross has been meeting with Ivan Morozov personally, 3 times in the last 6 months, all off the books, all in locations with no surveillance." The room went very quiet. "He's not just funding them," Lucien said slowly. "He's building an army. It looks that way." "Against who?" Anton met his eyes. "Against you. The marriage triggered it. The moment you married Seraphina, Cross started moving money. He's not trying to get her back through lawyers or public pressure. He's building a force that can take you down and take her with the wreckage." Lucien stood up and walked to the window. Chicago spread below him, cold, gray, indifferent, a city that had survived fires and floods and 100 years of men who thought they owned it. He pressed his hand against the glass and felt the cold seep into his palm. Damien Cross wasn't just an abuser. He was a strategist, a man who had been planning for the possibility that Seraphina might escape, and had prepared a contingency that turned a personal obsession into a full-scale war. And Lucien had walked right into it. "How long before Morozov is operational?" Lucien asked, based on the funding timeline and recruitment patterns. 2 months. Maybe less. 2 months. In 2 months, a man who had beaten and broken Seraphina Vale would have an army capable of reaching into the heart of Lucien's empire. Not to negotiate, not to compete, but to destroy. And Seraphina would be caught in the middle. Lucien turned from the window. "Call everyone in, Victor, the captains, the entire council, tonight." "What's the play?" Lucien's face had become something that Anton, despite his professional detachment, found genuinely unsettling. Not angry, not cold, something beyond both. "We don't wait 2 months, Lucien said. "We hit first." That night, while Lucien sat in a room full of killers planning a war, Seraphina Vale stood alone in the kitchen of Blackthorn Manor at 3 a.m. She'd come down for water, just water. But she'd found herself standing at the kitchen counter staring at a knife block and breathing too fast. Not because she wanted to hurt herself, she was past that, barely, by months that felt like minutes, but because the knives reminded her of something Damien used to do. He'd leave them out, on the counter, on the bedside table, on the bathroom vanity, always visible, always within reach, never touched, never used, just present. A reminder that violence didn't need to be loud to be constant. She was still standing there when Elena walked in. The old housekeeper stopped in the doorway. Her eyes moved from Seraphina to the knife block and back. Something ancient and knowing passed across her weathered face. "Can't sleep?" Elena asked. Seraphina shook her head. Elena walked to the counter, moved the knife block to a cabinet, closed the door, and then put the kettle on. Chamomile or peppermint? I don't... Peppermint, Elena decided. She pulled 2 mugs from the shelf and sat down at the kitchen island. They drank tea in silence for 15 minutes. Elena didn't ask questions, didn't offer advice, didn't try to fill the quiet with words that wouldn't help. When Seraphina finally spoke, her voice was barely above a whisper. Does he always sit outside my door? Elena looked at her. Yes. Why? Elena took a long sip of her tea. I've known Lucien Vexley since he was 9 years old. Angry, skinny little boy with blood on his shirt and nobody to wash it. I've watched him become things that would make most people sick, but I've also watched him sit outside your door every single night for 3 weeks. She set down her mug. I don't know why, and I think if you asked him, he wouldn't know either, but it's the first decent thing I've seen him do in 25 years. Seraphina wrapped both hands around her mug. I don't know how to trust someone like him. You don't have to, Elena said. Trust takes time. And time is the one thing that man will give you. Seraphina stared into her tea, and somewhere deep inside the shell that years of abuse had built around her, a shell so thick she'd forgotten there was anything underneath it, something cracked, not broke, not opened, just cracked. It was the tiniest fracture, the smallest possible shift, but it was there, and once a crack begins, it doesn't stop. Upstairs, in the war room, Lucien Vexley was staring at a map of Chicago with red pins marking Morozov positions when his phone buzzed. An unknown number, a text message, 5 words. She was never yours, Vexley. He stared at the screen. Then a second message arrived. A photograph. Seraphina, standing in the kitchen of Blackthorn Manor, taken from outside the window. From the garden. From inside his own perimeter. Damien Cross had eyes inside Blackthorn. And the war had already begun. Lucien didn't breathe for 6 seconds. He stared at the photograph on his phone. Seraphina standing in his kitchen, captured through a window that was supposed to be behind 3 layers of security, 2 armed patrols, and a surveillance grid he'd spent $4 million installing. The image was sharp, recent, taken from the East Garden based on the angle, close enough to read the label on the tea box Elena had left on the counter, close enough to touch her. He looked up from the phone. The war room was still full. Victor, the 4 captains, Anton Reyes, 2 communications specialists, all of them watching him because they'd been mid-sentence when his face changed. Everyone out! Nobody moved. Now! The room cleared in 8 seconds. Victor was the last one standing, hand on the doorframe, reading Lucien's expression with the instinct of a man who had spent 2 decades translating silence into threat levels. What happened? Lucien turned the phone screen toward him. Victor's face didn't change. It never did. But his hand dropped from the doorframe and both fists closed at his sides. Slowly, deliberately, like he was wrapping his fingers around someone's throat in his mind. When was this taken? Tonight. Within the last hour. She was in the kitchen at 3. The East Garden camera would have caught... Would it? Lucien's voice was low and flat. Would it, Vic? Because someone walked through my perimeter, stood 20 feet from my wife, took a photograph, and walked out. So either the cameras failed or someone turned them off. The implication landed like a brick through glass. Victor pulled out his own phone and dialed. Get me the East Garden footage from 2 to 4 a.m., every angle, every frame. If there's a gap, I want to know exactly how long and who had access to the system during that window. He hung up and looked at Lucien. We have 31 people with grounds access tonight. 12 on perimeter rotation, 7 with camera system credentials. Then we have a problem, Lucien said, because one of those people works for Damien Cross. He walked to the window and pressed his forehead against the cold glass. Below, Chicago glittered with the indifference of a city that had watched men like him rise and fall for 100 years. Somewhere out there, Damien Cross was sitting in a room just like this one, smiling at his phone, knowing exactly what that photograph would do. Not a threat. A message. I can reach her whenever I want. Lock the house down, Lucien said without turning around. Nobody enters or leaves without my authorization. Double the interior patrols. And Vic, I want her moved to the East Wing. My wing. The room across from mine. Victor paused. She's not going to like that. I don't care what she likes. I care that she's breathing tomorrow. Victor left. Lucien stayed at the window and typed a response to the unknown number. 3 words. Come get her. The message was delivered. Then read. Then nothing. No response. No typing indicator. Just silence from a man who understood that psychological warfare was fought in the spaces between words. Lucien pocketed the phone and sat down in the dark. He didn't go to her door that night. For the first time in 3 weeks, the hallway outside Seraphina's room was empty. She noticed. At 2:47 a.m., Seraphina woke from a dream she couldn't remember and lay in the dark listening. No cigarette smoke, no breathing through the door, no presence on the other side of the wood, just empty hallway silence and the distant hum of the heating system. She told herself it didn't matter. She told herself she didn't need a killer sitting outside her door to feel safe. She told herself she'd survived years without anyone guarding her sleep, and she could survive tonight. She didn't fall back asleep until dawn. The next morning, everything was different. Seraphina stepped out of her room at 8:15 and found 2 men she'd never seen before standing in the hallway. Large men, armed. They didn't speak to her. They just fell into step, one in front, one behind, and followed her to the kitchen like shadows with earpieces. Elena was already there, pouring coffee. What's happening? Seraphina asked. Elena set the coffee pot down with a care that seemed deliberate. Mr. Vexley has increased security. Why? Elena looked at her with an expression that contained something Seraphina couldn't quite name. Pity, maybe, or the careful neutrality of someone who knew too much and had been told to share none of it. You'd have to ask him. Seraphina found Lucien in his office 40 minutes later. She had to pass through 2 checkpoints to get there. Actual checkpoints, in a hallway of his own house, with men who checked her name against a list before letting her through. The absurdity of it almost made her laugh. Almost. The office door was open. Lucien sat behind his desk looking like he hadn't slept. His shirt was wrinkled. The same shirt from yesterday. His jaw was dark with stubble, and his eyes had the hollow, over-focused look of someone running on caffeine and something uglier. She stepped inside and the 2 guards stayed in the hallway. Why are there armed men following me? Lucien didn't look up from the documents on his desk. Security upgrade. From what? Seraphina. From what? He looked up. Their eyes met, and she saw something in his that made her stomach drop. Not anger, not the cold calculation she'd gotten used to, but something raw. Something he was trying to bury and failing. Someone took a photograph of you last night, in the kitchen, from outside the window. The blood drained from her face. It was sent to my phone from an unregistered number. The angle indicates it was taken from inside the East Garden, inside my perimeter. She gripped the back of the chair in front of his desk. Her knuckles went white. Damien. It wasn't a question. Sit down. I don't want to sit down. Sit down, Seraphina. She sat. Not because he told her to, because her legs were failing. He has someone inside, Lucien said. Someone on my staff. Someone with access to the grounds, and probably the camera system. I don't know who yet, but I'm going to find out. Her breathing had gone shallow again. That pattern. The one he recognized now. The one that meant she was leaving the present and falling backward into a place where every wall was closing in. Hey. His voice changed, softer. Not gentle. Lucien didn't do gentle, but deliberate. Grounded. Look at me. She did. He's not getting in here, do you understand? I don't care how many people he's bought. I don't care what he's planned. He's not touching you. You don't know him, she whispered. I know enough. No, you don't. Her voice cracked and something behind her eyes shifted from fear to something fiercer. You think he's some rich guy with a temper. He's not. Damien doesn't lose. He doesn't stop. He doesn't get bored and move on. He dismantles people, piece by piece. He'll take your business, your allies, your reputation, and when you have nothing left, he'll take me back and he'll make sure I know it was my fault for running. The room was very quiet. Is that what he told you? Lucien asked. It's what he did. To every person who ever tried to help me. My friend Rebecca introduced me to a lawyer. 3 weeks later, Rebecca lost her job, her apartment, and her custody case. My therapist suggested I leave him. 2 months later, her practice was under investigation for insurance fraud that didn't exist. Seraphina's hands were shaking in her lap. He doesn't just hurt you. He erases the people around you until you're completely alone. Until you believe that leaving is more dangerous than staying. Dios. Lucien leaned back in his chair and studied her. How long? How long what? How long did it take before you stopped trying to leave? The question hit her like a slap. She looked away. Her jaw tightened and he watched her fight through something, shame, maybe, or the specific kind of rage that comes from knowing the answer and hating yourself for it. 18 months, she said quietly. After the second time he broke my ribs, I stopped calling anyone. After the third time, I stopped leaving the apartment. After the fourth, she trailed off. Her eyes were dry, but her voice wasn't. After the fourth time, I started believing I deserved it. Lucien's hand tightened on the arm of his chair until the leather creaked. You didn't. I know that now. Knowing it and feeling it are different things. He stood up and walked to the window. He needed distance. Not from her. From himself. From the thing building in his chest that wanted him to find Damien Cross right now, tonight, and end this with his hands. I'm moving you to the East Wing, he said. My wing, the room across from mine, non-negotiable. I said non-negotiable. She stood up. And I said I didn't agree to be moved around like furniture in your house. They stared at each other across the desk. Two broken people with completely different damage trying to communicate across a gap that neither of them had the tools to bridge. This isn't about control, Lucien said. It feels like control. The words landed and he saw the flash in her eyes. The recognition that she'd just compared him to Damien. She hadn't meant to. He knew that. But the comparison hung in the air between them like smoke, and neither of them could wave it away. I'm not him, Lucien said. His voice was quiet, but there was something underneath it that trembled. I know. Do you? She didn't answer. She picked up the coffee mug Elena had given her and walked out of the office without looking back. She moved to the East Wing that afternoon. She didn't fight it again. Not because she'd accepted it, but because she'd seen the photograph. Victor showed it to her at Lucien's instruction. The image of herself in the kitchen, oblivious, vulnerable, framed in a window like a target. She'd looked at it for a long time without speaking and then handed the phone back and asked which room was hers. The mole hunt tore through Blackthorn Manor like a disease. Lucien's approach was methodical and merciless. Over the next 72 hours, every member of his household staff and security detail was subjected to what Victor euphemistically called enhanced vetting, a process that involved financial audits, phone clones, and interviews conducted in a basement room where the acoustic tiles muffled everything. The house became a pressure cooker. People who had worked together for years started watching each other sideways. Conversation stopped when someone new entered a room. Meals were eaten in silence, with eyes darting over plates and forks frozen midway to mouths. On the second day, Lucien fired 3 perimeter guards whose financial records showed unexplained deposits in the past 6 months. All 3 swore innocence. One of them, a man named Brennan, who'd worked Vexley security for 8 years, got loud about it. This is garbage, Lucien. 8 years I've been loyal. 8 years I've bled for this family. And now you're tossing me because some algorithm flagged a wire for my ex-wife's mother? Lucien looked at him from behind his desk with an expression that carried the weight of a coffin lid. The deposit was $16,000, Brennan. Your ex-wife's mother lives on Social Security in a 1-bedroom in Cicero. Where did the money come from? She sold her car. She doesn't have a car. She takes the bus. Victor checked. Brennan's face went the color of old cement. His mouth opened and closed twice. The room was very still. I didn't sell anyone out, he said, but the conviction had drained from his voice like water through cracks. Then you won't mind if we hold on to your phone, your laptop, and your access credentials while we verify that. You'll be contacted when the review is complete. If you're clean, you'll be compensated for the inconvenience. And if I'm not clean? Lucien just looked at him. Brennan left without another word. But the mole wasn't Brennan. And it wasn't the other 2 guards either. The real breach came from a direction nobody expected. On the third night, Anton Reyes walked into Lucien's office at 11 p.m., carrying a tablet with an expression that suggested he'd rather be anywhere else in the world. I found the gap in the camera footage, Anton said. The East Garden camera was on a 17-second loop from 2:12 to 2:41 a.m. Professional work. Someone with direct access to the monitoring software spliced the feed. Who has that access? 7 people. I've eliminated 4 based on alibi and location data. Anton set the tablet on the desk. Of the remaining 3, 1 stands out. Lucien looked at the screen. The name made his blood go cold. Jonas Cade. 29 years old, former military. Hired 18 months ago as part of an expansion of Lucien's personal security detail. Vetted by Victor personally. Stationed inside the manor, with full camera system credentials and unrestricted grounds access. And according to phone records Anton had extracted from a cloned SIM card, Jonas Cade had made 11 calls to a prepaid number in the last 3 weeks. A number that traced to a relay service, that traced to a server that traced to a shell company that traced to Damien Cross. 18 months. Cross had planted Jonas a year and a half ago. Before the marriage, before the alliance, before Seraphina had ever said Lucien's name. Damien Cross had been inside Blackthorn Manor since the beginning, watching, waiting, reporting. Lucien closed his eyes. Where is he right now? West Corridor, night shift. Bring him to the basement. Lucien, the basement, Anton. What happened in the basement of Blackthorn Manor that night would never appear in any record or report. Victor conducted the conversation. Lucien watched from a chair in the corner with his arms crossed and his face empty. Jonas Cade was professional about it. He didn't beg, he didn't cry. He sat in the metal chair with zip-tied wrists and answered questions with the flat calm of someone who had already accepted the math of his situation. How long have you been working for Cross? Victor asked. 14 months. What were you paid? 20,000 a month, wired to an account in my sister's name. What did you report? Everything, schedules, security rotations, staff movements, Lucien's habits, her habits. Lucien spoke for the first time. Did you take the photograph? Jonas looked at him. Something flickered behind his eyes. Not regret exactly, but recognition. The recognition that he was talking to the thing he should have been most afraid of all along. No, someone from outside came through this garden. I looped the cameras so they could get in and out clean. I didn't know they were going to take a photo. Cross told me it was a dry run. A dry run for what? Jonas swallowed. Extraction. The word dropped into the room like a stone into deep water. I wants to take her, Jonas said. Not now. Not yet. He's waiting for the right moment. Something public. Something that makes you look weak. He wants the whole city to see that you can't protect what's yours. Lucien uncrossed his arms. He leaned forward in his chair. The candlelight in the basement caught the angles of his face and turned them into something that barely looked human. When? I don't know the date. He doesn't tell me operational details. I'm just the inside man. Who else is compromised? Nobody in the house. I'm the only one. But he has people outside. Mercs. Former private military. At least 12. Maybe more. They've been staging in a warehouse on the south side for the past 2 weeks. Victor looked at Lucien. Lucien didn't look back. One more question, Lucien said. Did you ever see him hurt her? In person, when they were together? Did you ever see Damien Cross put his hands on Seraphina? Jonas stared at the floor. Answer me. Once. At a fundraiser. Before I was planted here. I was doing freelance security for the venue. He grabbed her by the hair in a service hallway and slammed her against a wall. She didn't make a sound. Not one sound. Just stood there and took it. Jonas looked up. That's why I took the job when Cross offered it. Not because I agreed with what he was doing, because the money was good and I told myself it wasn't my problem. The room went silent. Lucien stood up. Vic, handle it. He walked up the basement stairs and didn't look back. At 4:17 in the morning, Lucien knocked on Seraphina's door. He heard her stir, heard her feet on the floor. The door opened 2 inches, the chain still on, and she looked at him through the gap with sleep-blurred eyes and hair falling across her face. What's wrong? We found the mole, he said. It's handled. She searched his face. What does handled mean? Means you're safe. That's not what I asked. He leaned one shoulder against the doorframe. He was exhausted, 4 days of barely sleeping. His eyes were red and his face was drawn, and for the first time since she'd met him, Lucien Vexley looked like what he actually was, a 34-year-old man carrying the weight of an empire that was trying to crush him. I found the person who looped the cameras, he said. One of my own people, planted by Damien over a year ago. She inhaled sharply. Cross has been watching this house since before we were married. Before the alliance was even finalized. He knew this was coming and he prepared for it. Prepared for what? Lucien hesitated. He was choosing his words and she could see it. The calculation happening behind his eyes. The assessment of what she could handle and what would break her. Don't do that, she said. Do what? Decide what I can hear. Damien used to do that. He'd filter everything so I never had the full picture. So I was always confused, always dependent. If you want me to trust you, tell me the truth. The words hit him harder than she intended. He saw it register on her face, the flicker of awareness that she'd just drawn a line between him and the man who'd destroyed her. Cross is planning to take you, Lucien said. Not by force. Not yet. He wants to do it publicly. He wants to humiliate me and reclaim you in front of the entire syndicate. He has mercenaries staging somewhere in the city. I don't have a date, but it's coming. She didn't flinch. She didn't cry. She stood behind the chain-locked door and absorbed the information with a stillness that was more frightening than any panic attack he'd witnessed. What are you going to do? She asked. I'm going to find him before he moves. And then? Seraphina. And then what, Lucy? Are you going to kill him? The question hung in the 2-inch gap between them. Would you want me to? She stared at him. Her lips parted, but nothing came out. The answer lived somewhere inside her that she wasn't ready to reach. A dark place where the woman who'd survived 4 years of torture kept a list of things she'd never say out loud. I want to stop being afraid, she whispered finally. I don't care what that costs. He held her gaze for a long moment. Go back to sleep. He pushed off the doorframe and started down the hallway. He was 4 steps away when her voice stopped him. Lucien. He turned. She'd unchained the door. It stood open. Not wide, but enough. She stood in the frame in an oversized shirt with her arms wrapped around herself and her bare feet on the cold marble. Thank you, she said, for sitting outside the door. All those nights. Thank you. Something moved across his face that he couldn't control. Something he would have killed to hide. It was there for half a second, vulnerability, naked and unguarded. And then it was gone, replaced by the mask he'd worn since he was 16 years old. Don't thank me, he said. I'm not a good man, Seraphina. I know what you are. Then you know that what's coming next is going to be ugly. I know. He turned and walked away. His footsteps echoed down the hall, and she stood in the doorway listening until they faded. Then she closed the door. She didn't lock it. 2 days later, the Winter Syndicate Gala invitation arrived. It came on cream-colored cardstock in an envelope embossed with silver, the kind of invitation that looked like a party but functioned like a summons. Every major player in the Chicago underworld would be there. Attendance wasn't optional. Absence was a statement, and in this world, statements had consequences. Victor tossed the invitation on Lucien's desk like it was a dead rat. Cross will be there. I know. He's on the guest list, +2, which means he's bringing muscle and he wants you to know it. Lucien picked up the invitation and turned it over in his hands. Who's hosting? Margaret Chen. She controls the neutral ground agreement. If we skip this, every undecided crew in the Midwest reads it as weakness. And if we go, Cross gets Seraphina in a room. If we go, Victor countered, we get Cross in a room, out in the open, in front of witnesses, where every move he makes is public record to 300 people who determine the power structure of this city. Lucien set the invitation down. She won't want to go. Then don't bring her. If I show up without her, it looks like I'm hiding her, like I'm afraid. Are you? Lucien looked at Victor with an expression that could have stripped paint. Get her a dress, he said. Something that makes the whole room stop, and make sure every man we have is inside that building. On the night of the gala, Seraphina stood in front of the mirror in her room and didn't recognize the woman staring back. The silver gown fit like liquid armor, low back, high neck, a cut that turned her body into something architectural. Her hair was down for the first time since the wedding. Dark auburn against silver fabric, minimal jewelry, minimal makeup. She looked like a weapon someone had forgotten to sheathe. She was terrified. Her hands shook as she fastened the clasp of a thin bracelet. The small silver chain kept slipping through her fingers, and she fumbled it 3 times before she stopped trying. She pressed both palms flat against the vanity and breathed. In, out, in, out. A knock at her door. She opened it. Lucien stood in the hallway in a black suit that made him look like the final scene of a movie where nobody survives. His jaw was clean. His hair was pushed back. His eyes moved over her once, quick, clinical, and something in them shifted. Not desire, recognition, like he was seeing her clearly for the first time, and the sight of it had rearranged something inside his chest. You don't have to do this, he said. Yes, I do. Seraphina, he took 4 years from me. He took everything. My voice, my choices, my ability to walk into a room without scanning every exit. I'm not giving him one more night. Her voice was steady, but her hands were still trembling. I'm going. Lucien reached into his jacket and produced a small folded knife. Pearl handle. 3-inch blade. He held it out to her. Inside your clutch, just in case. She looked at the knife, then at him. Then she took it and dropped it into the silver clutch bag on the vanity. Ready? He asked. No. Good. Ready is overrated. They walked down the staircase side by side, not touching, not speaking. Victor waited at the bottom with 4 cars and 12 armed men. The convoy pulled out of Blackthorn Manor at 8:30 p.m. and cut through Chicago like a funeral procession in reverse. Seraphina stared out the window the entire drive. Lucien watched her reflection in the glass and memorized the way her jaw tightened every time they passed a streetlight, the way her fingers curled and uncurled in her lap, the way she breathed, controlled, deliberate, the rhythm of someone who had learned to manage their own panic through sheer force of will. He wanted to tell her it would be fine. He didn't, because he wasn't sure it would be. The gala occupied the entire top floor of the Meridian Grand, a historic hotel that had survived Prohibition, the Depression, and 2 generations of organized crime by maintaining a strict policy of elegant neutrality. Crystal chandeliers the size of small cars hung from vaulted ceilings. An orchestra played something classical in the southeast corner. 300 guests moved through the space in tuxedos and gowns, carrying champagne and grudges with equal grace. Seraphina descended the main staircase beside Lucien and the room reacted. Conversations paused mid-sentence. Heads turned. Someone near the bar actually set their drink down to watch. She moved through the attention like a woman walking through fire. Eyes forward, chin level, every step placed with the kind of precision that came from years of performing composure she didn't feel. They were 17 steps into the ballroom when she saw him. Damien Cross stood near the far wall holding a champagne flute with the relaxed posture of a man attending a garden party. Gray suit, open collar. That smile, the one she'd seen 1,000 times, the one that looked like charm but functioned like a blade. 2 men flanked him, both large, both watching the room with the trained alertness of professional security. He was already looking at her, had been looking since she walked in. Waiting. Seraphina's body betrayed her. 3 years of therapy, 4 weeks of fragile progress, and the moment she saw his face, every circuit in her nervous system fired at once. Her vision narrowed, her hands went cold. Her breathing collapsed into that rapid, shallow pattern that Lucien now knew better than his own heartbeat. Lucien felt her freeze, felt the micro-hesitation in her step, the way her arm stiffened against his. I see him, he murmured without moving his lips. Breathe. I can't. You can. Look at me. She didn't. She couldn't take her eyes off Damien. It was the pull of a wound, the compulsive need to press on the thing that hurts the most. Damien raised his glass toward her across the ballroom and smiled wider. Then he started walking toward them. Lucien's hand moved to the small of Seraphina's back, not pressing, just present, the lightest possible contact through the fabric of her gown. She didn't flinch this time. She leaned into it, a millimeter, maybe 2. But he felt it, and the sensation cracked through him like current through a wire. Damien stopped 6 feet away. His eyes moved from Seraphina to Lucien and back with the lazy amusement of a cat, watching something it intended to eat. Seraphina. He said her name like he owned the syllables. You look incredible. Marriage suits you. She said nothing. Damien turned to Lucien. Mr. Vexley, I don't think we formally met. Damien Cross. He extended his hand. Lucien looked at it like it was covered in something foul. I know who you are, Lucien said. Then you know I'm harmless. Damien grinned, teeth white, eyes dead. Just a businessman paying his respects to the happy couple. Your respects are noted. Move along. Damien tilted his head. The grin didn't falter. That's not very hospitable. I thought the Vexley syndicate prided itself on civility. You thought wrong. The air between them had turned to glass. Guests nearby had stopped talking. The nearest group of 4, 2 judges and their wives, took a collective step backward without seeming to notice they'd done it. Damien looked at Seraphina again. You're quiet tonight. You were always quiet when you were scared. He leaned closer, just slightly, just enough. Some things never change. Lucien stepped forward. One step. Just one. But the step closed the distance between them to 3 feet and changed the geometry of the conversation from social to lethal. Walk away, Lucien said, while you can. Or what? You'll make a scene? In front of everyone? The great Lucien Vexley losing composure over a woman? Damien's voice dropped to a register meant only for the three of them. You really think marrying a mafia king erased our history? He turned to Seraphina. His eyes locked onto hers with the precision of a sniper finding a target he'd hit 1,000 times before. Ask your wife what happens when she disobeys me. Seraphina stopped breathing, and then Damien reached out and grabbed her wrist. The ballroom went silent. Not gradually, not in waves. Every conversation, every laugh, every clink of glass, all of it stopped at once, as if someone had pulled the plug on the entire room. 300 people stood frozen, watching. Lucien moved. He moved so fast that the guests closest to them would later disagree about what they actually saw. 1 second, Damien was standing upright with his hand on Seraphina's wrist. The next, his body was airborne, launched backward through a cocktail table that exploded into glass and ice and champagne in a spray that caught the chandelier light and turned it into something almost beautiful. Lucien was on top of him before the glass finished falling. The first punch cracked Damien's orbital bone. The second split his lip wide open. The third, fourth, and fifth were the ones that came from somewhere deeper than anger, somewhere primal and old and starving, the place where Lucien kept every violent impulse he'd spent his adult life learning to control. He hit Damien cross with everything he had and everything he'd been saving. Security moved. Guns materialized from beneath tuxedos. Damien's 2 men reached for their weapons and were immediately met by 4 of Lucien's people with pistols already drawn. Women screamed, guests scrambled backward, someone knocked over the ice sculpture and it shattered across the floor. Lucien pulled a blade from his jacket and pressed it against Damien's throat. Blood ran down Damien's face. His left eye was already swelling shut, his lip was torn, but he was smiling. Through the blood, through the pain, through the wreckage of a $5,000 table, he was smiling. You touch her again, Lucien growled, his voice barely human, and they'll never find enough of your body to bury. Damien laughed, a wet, bubbling sound that pushed blood between his teeth. Too late, he whispered. She'll never stop being afraid of me. Lucien looked up. Across the destroyed ballroom, Seraphina stood alone in her silver gown surrounded by broken glass and spilled champagne. She was trembling so violently the fabric shook. Tears streamed down her face. Her mouth was open, but no sound came out. She looked exactly like the woman in every surveillance video Lucien had watched. Frozen, shattered, trapped inside a body that had learned to endure but never to escape. And Damien was right. She was still afraid of him, even with the blade at his throat. Even beaten and bleeding on the floor, even surrounded by Lucien's armed men. Damien Cross still owned the part of Seraphina that no amount of violence could reach. Lucien stood up slowly. He wiped the blade on his jacket and put it away. His knuckles were split and bleeding. His breathing was ragged. His suit was ruined. He walked toward Seraphina through the wreckage. She flinched when he got close. Not because of him, because every nerve in her body was firing and she couldn't distinguish safety from danger anymore. We're leaving, he said quietly. She nodded without speaking. He didn't touch her. He walked beside her toward the exit, and Victor materialized at his shoulder with a phone already pressed to his ear, barking orders to bring the cars around. Behind them, Damien Cross sat up on the ruined floor, spit blood onto the marble, and watched them leave, still smiling. In the car, Seraphina sat pressed against the far door with her arms wrapped around herself. She didn't speak the entire drive. Lucien sat on his side and stared at his bleeding knuckles and thought about what Damien had said. She'll never stop being afraid of me. It wasn't a taunt. It was a diagnosis. When they reached Blackthorn Manor, Seraphina went to her room without a word. The door closed. The lock turned. The silence settled over the east wing like dust over a grave. Lucien stood in the hallway outside her door for a long time. Then he walked down to his office, sat behind his desk, and made a decision that he knew would change everything and couldn't be undone. He picked up the phone and called Victor. Mobilize everyone, every crew, every safe house, every asset we have. I want Damien Cross's entire world dismantled in 72 hours. Lucien, if we go to war with Cross openly, the council can fall in line or fall in the ground. I'm done waiting. He hung up. And somewhere across Chicago, in a penthouse overlooking the lake, Damian Cross pressed a napkin to his bleeding mouth and picked up his own phone. It worked, Damian said. He's emotional. He'll overreach. When he does, I want her out of that house within the hour. He set down the phone and walked to the window. The Chicago skyline glittered below, and the trap he'd been building for 18 months clicked into place. The trap sprung at 3 in the morning, 41 hours after the gala. Lucien had been awake for most of those 41 hours. He'd slept 90 minutes in a chair in his office sometime around noon the previous day. Not real sleep, just the body shutting down briefly before the brain dragged it back. His desk was covered in maps, financial printouts, satellite images of 3 suspected Morozov staging locations on the south side. He had 16 crews in motion across the city. He had judges being quietly pressured. He had cross-industries financial architecture being dismantled from the inside by 3 forensic accountants working in shifts. I thought he was the one doing the dismantling. He was wrong. Victor burst through the office door without knocking, which itself was wrong, because Victor knocked. Victor always knocked. Victor had knocked on every door he'd entered for 20 years out of a discipline so ingrained it was closer to religion than habit. She's gone. The words didn't reach Lucien for a full second. They hung in the air like smoke that hadn't decided which direction to move. Say that again. Seraphina. Her room is empty. East Wing cameras show her leaving her room at 2:47 a.m. She walked to the side entrance off the service corridor. The door was propped open from the outside. There are tracks in the frost on the east lawn, 4 sets of boots and 1 set of smaller shoes. They moved toward the tree line. Lucien stood up. His chair scraped back so hard it hit the wall. Who was on interior patrol? Manny Reyes and Dokes, both found in the service corridor. Manny has a head wound. Dokes is unconscious. They were hit from behind, professional, quiet. Lucien's mind was running calculations so fast the room felt like it was compressing around him. In and out in under 2 minutes. Interior patrol neutralized without a gunshot. East Wing door propped from outside. 4-man team, which meant they'd been in position before nightfall, which meant they were already inside the perimeter before Lucien had issued a single order at the gala, which meant this wasn't reactive, Lucien said. No. He didn't decide to move because of the gala. The gala was the distraction. While I was beating his face in front of 300 witnesses, his team was positioning here. Victor said nothing. Because there was nothing to say. Lucien grabbed his jacket from the back of the chair and his phone from the desk, and walked out of the office at a pace that made the 2 guards in the hallway scramble to keep up. Get Anton, get everyone. Find out where they went, traffic cameras, tollway records, private airfields within 60 miles. He won't take her to the city. He knows I own the city. Lucien. Victor's voice came from 3 steps behind, and there was something in it. A register Lucien hadn't heard in a long time. Almost careful. There's something else. Lucien stopped walking. The security footage from the service corridor, the timestamp on the East Wing door being propped, it was 2:19 a.m. But Seraphina left her room at 2:47, 28-minute gap. Meaning the door was already open when she walked to it. Meaning she didn't go to the door because she heard something or saw something. She woke up at 2:47, got dressed, and walked directly to a door that had been propped open 28 minutes earlier. Victor paused. Like she knew it would be there. The hallway was very quiet. Lucien turned slowly. You're saying she went willingly? Victor didn't answer, which was an answer. Show me the footage. They watched it together in the security room. Grainy night vision green, the timestamp ticking in the corner. The corridor was empty. Then the East Wing door opened. Seraphina stepped out in dark clothes, hair down, clutch bag in one hand. She walked to the side entrance, paused at the door, looked back once down the corridor, then walked out. No hesitation, no struggle, no one pushing her, no hand on her arm. She just walked out. Lucien watched the footage 3 times. He watched the way she paused at the door with a specific kind of stillness. Not the terrified paralysis he'd come to recognize, but something closer to resolution. Decision. He watched her look back down the corridor and he tried to read what was in that glance, and he couldn't. He didn't know her well enough. He didn't know if she was looking for him, or away from him, or simply committing the place to memory before leaving it forever. He rewound to the moment. She looked back and froze the frame. Her face was angled slightly away from the camera, half in shadow. But the half he could see was dry. No tears, jaw set, spine straight. She wasn't being rescued. He sat down. The security room was small and smelled like coffee and old equipment. The monitors cast blue light across his face, and he sat in it and felt something hollowing out in his chest. Not anger yet. Something that would become anger but hadn't gotten there. Something rawer. Something he hadn't felt since he was old enough to understand what abandonment actually meant. Get me every contact she's had in the last 4 weeks, he said. Every call, every text, every email. Anything she might have sent from the house. She didn't have a phone, Victor said. We never issued her one. Then she used something else. Check Elena's phone, check the kitchen landline, check every computer she had access to. Victor left to arrange it. Lucien stayed in the security room alone with the frozen frame of Seraphina looking back over her shoulder. He stared at it long enough that the image started to blur at the edges. Then he stood up, walked to the wall, and put his fist through the plaster. The pain came back with his knuckles, split open again from the gala, now torn wider against the concrete backing of the drywall. He looked at his hand. Blood ran down his palm and dripped off his middle finger. He watched it fall onto the floor. He thought about the knife he'd given her. Pearl handle. 3-inch blade. Whether she still had it. He hoped she did. The intel came back in pieces over the next 4 hours, and each piece made the picture uglier. The kitchen landline had 3 outgoing calls in the past 2 weeks that weren't logged in the official household records. The calls were made between 6 and 7 in the morning, before most of the staff arrived, during the window when Elena started her shift, but was alone in the kitchen for the first 30 minutes. Short calls. 40 seconds. 1 minute. 53 seconds. The number was traced to a prepaid device. Prepaid devices were Cross's preferred instrument of communication. Lucien knew this from the Jonas Cade investigation. The relay, the shell company, the deliberate paper trail dead ends. All of it matched Cross's operational fingerprint. But here was the thing that twisted in Lucien's gut like a rusted wire. The calls had been placed from the kitchen phone. The kitchen phone that Seraphina had access to. The kitchen where Elena had left her alone every morning while going to collect laundry from the service room. And Elena, when Victor brought her in at 6 a.m., with her house dress still half-buttoned and her gray hair loose, looked at Lucien across the kitchen island with an expression that was unreadable until it wasn't. Elena. She put her hands flat on the counter. She looked down at them. She looked up at him. She called him, Lucien said. Not a question. Elena's jaw tightened. For a long moment, the only sound was the refrigerator hum and the distant noise of the city coming alive outside the windows. She called him twice, Elena said quietly. 3 weeks ago and 10 days ago. She used my phone the first time before I realized what she was doing. After that, she had access to the kitchen line. I should have told you. The kitchen was very still. Why didn't you? It wasn't a question either. It was the kind of flat statement that came just before the part where things got very bad. Because she asked me not to. Elena raised her eyes to meet his, and there was no apology in them, just the stubborn dignity of a woman who had made a choice and owned it. She was terrified. The gala was 2 days away. She had a knife in her purse, and a man who used to put her in the hospital on the other end of a phone line. I don't know what she said to him. I don't know what he offered her, but she was 27 years old, and she had been destroyed by that man, and whatever she decided to do about it was not my place to prevent. She's not 27 and free, Lucien said. His voice had gone to that place, the place below anger. She's 27 and somewhere I can't see her with 4 mercenaries and the man who broke her ribs. Elena flinched. It was small, but it was there. Did you know about the extraction? He asked. Did she tell you when they were coming? No. Did you prop the door? No. Do you know where they took her? No. Elena's voice cracked on the word. The first crack. She pressed her lips together and straightened. I swear to you, Lucien, I don't know where she is. He looked at her for a long time. He had known this woman for 25 years. She had washed blood off his shirts when he was 9 years old and asked no questions. She had made him eat when grief made him forget. She had buried 2 of his secrets with the same matter-of-fact efficiency she applied to everything else. He believed her, which meant Seraphina hadn't trusted anyone with the full picture. Not even Elena. Not even him. She had made contact with Damien Cross, listened to whatever he'd promised or threatened, and made a decision in the dark by herself. The way someone moves when they've been alone for so long that asking for help has stopped feeling like an option. You're suspended, he said to Elena. Get out of this kitchen. Don't go far. She left without a word. Lucien sat down on a kitchen stool and pressed both hands against the counter and breathed. In, out. He thought about what she'd said to him through the cracked door 3 nights ago. I want to stop being afraid. I don't care what that costs. He hadn't understood it then. He understood it now. She'd called Damien because she thought she could end it herself. Make some deal, extract some promise. Find the off switch for the fear that had run her life for 4 years. She hadn't run back to him. She'd walked toward him because she believed, because 4 years of being controlled had convinced her, that the only way to be free of Damien Cross was to face him on his terms. She was wrong, and she was already in his hands. Anton found the location at 9:14 a.m. through a combination of tollway cameras, a fuel purchase on a rural highway in Kankakee County, and a property record showing a shell company connected to Cross's third-tier offshore holdings owning a decommissioned property 40 miles south of Chicago. The property record described it as a former civic building, large stone structure, located on a rural plot surrounded by 4 acres of dead farmland with 1 road in and 1 road out. The imagery pulled from the county assessor's database showed a Gothic stone building with a peaked roof and narrow windows and a bell tower that no longer had a bell. An old assembly hall, deconsecrated, abandoned for over a decade. Lucien looked at the satellite image for 7 seconds. How many men can we move in the next 2 hours? 30, maybe 40 if we pull the crews off the south side. Pull them. If we pull south side, we lose coverage on the Morozov staging warehouse. If they move while we're... Pull them. Victor crossed his arms. Lucien, I need you to think for 10 seconds. I've been thinking for 4 hours. Pull the south side crews. And if this is another trap? The question fell into the room like a stone into deep water. Victor's face was grave. He wasn't being obstructive. He was being the person Lucien paid him to be. The one who asked the questions everyone else was afraid to voice. He used the gala as a distraction to move her. He used her phone calls to Cross as a way to establish contact he could control. He had a team inside our perimeter before the gala even started. Victor spoke slowly, carefully, like he was navigating broken glass in bare feet. Every move has been designed to make you react, emotionally, quickly, without the calculation you're known for. If you pull everyone and hit that building in a 2-hour window on intel that came together almost too cleanly, you think Anton's been compromised? I think we've already found one mole. I think Cross has been planning this for 18 months. And I think a man who's that patient doesn't just plan one move ahead. Lucien stood absolutely still. He hated that Victor was right. He hated it with a specific burning hatred that had nowhere to go because it was aimed at himself. At the part of himself that had been running on emotion since the moment he saw bruises under Seraphina's makeup on their wedding night. Check Anton, he said. I already started, 20 minutes ago before you asked. And? Victor's expression shifted, just slightly, just enough. His brother has a gambling debt, $300,000 owed to a bookmaker who, when you trace the ownership chain back 4 levels, is controlled by a holding company that receives funding from Cross Industries, Lucien said. Cross Industries. The kitchen was completely silent. He doesn't have to be active, Victor said. He might not even know he's compromised. Cross buys the debt, holds it as leverage, calls it in whenever he needs a piece of intel placed or a piece of intel buried. Anton gives him the location of the Kankakee property because Cross fed it to him through a channel that looked legitimate. Anton runs it, it checks out on every surface level. He has no reason to doubt it. Lucien sat down on the kitchen stool again and pressed his fingers into his eye sockets until he saw white. He was standing in a hall of mirrors. Every wall was a reflection that looked real until you walked into it. Can we verify the location independently, without Anton? Possibly, but it takes time, hours, maybe longer. And if she's actually there, then every hour we spend verifying is an hour she's with him. Lucien took his hands away from his eyes. He looked at the ceiling. The kitchen light hummed. Somewhere in the house, a clock ticked. He thought about what Seraphina had told him. He dismantles people, piece by piece. He takes everything. Then he takes me back and makes sure I know it was my fault. He thought about the 41 hours since the gala, the war he'd launched, the 16 crews he'd deployed, the financial assault on Cross Industries that had been running since dawn. He'd been moving fast, hitting hard, exactly the way Victor was describing. Emotionally, reactively, exactly the way Cross had engineered him to. And in those 41 hours, Lucien had pulled the majority of his assets away from his own house. His own house. He went very still. Victor, the East Wing. What about it? She walked out of the East Wing at 2:47. Four-man team, in and out in under 2 minutes. Our interior patrol was down. He stood up slowly. Our interior patrol was down because someone hit them. Two of our own men, hit by a four-man team that came in from the East Garden and extracted her in under 2 minutes. Right. In the dark. In a house they'd never been inside. Moving through corridors they'd have to have mapped in advance. Lucien's voice was becoming something different, flatter, colder, arriving at a place past anger into the operational clarity that had made him what he was. Jonas Cade was our mole. We pulled him 3 days ago. So how did Cross's extraction team know the interior layout of the East Wing? Victor opened his mouth, closed it. Jonas was surveillance, Lucien said. Outside information. He didn't have interior access to her wing. He couldn't map it. The East Wing is restricted. Only household staff and my direct security personnel are cleared. He paused. So there's another one. Victor looked like a man who'd swallowed something sharp. There's a second mole, Lucien said. Someone who has been inside the East Wing. Someone with interior access, who could map the corridors, identify the patrol timing, tell a four-man team exactly where to go and when to go there. They stared at each other. How many people have East Wing clearance? Lucien asked. Including recent additions. 14. Pull all 14. Now. I want them in the basement in 20 minutes. Everyone we can physically reach. I was already walking toward the door when his phone buzzed. Unknown number. Same relay pattern as before. One photo. Seraphina, sitting in what appeared to be a stone-walled room. Hands bound at the wrist with zip ties. Head bowed. Hair falling across her face. Alive, visibly breathing, chest moving. But her posture had the particular collapsed quality of someone who had been awake all night and had stopped fighting. On the table in front of her was the pearl-handled knife. Lucien's knife. Beneath the photo, one line of text. Alone at last. Come alone if you want her back in one piece. Come with an army and I'll send her back in pieces. Then a set of GPS coordinates. Lucien looked at the coordinates. Then at the satellite image of the Kankaki property still open on the table beside him. He compared the coordinates to the address. They matched, which meant one of two things. Either the location was real and Damien was confident enough to confirm it, or the location was real, it was a trap, and Damien was so confident in the trap that confirming the location cost him nothing. Victor read over his shoulder and said nothing. Lucien pulled up a map on his phone and examined the property layout. Single road in, stone building, open farmland on 3 sides. One road in meant one road out. A choke point. If you brought an army down that road, the army was visible from a mile away. If you came alone, you walked into a building surrounded by armed mercenaries. 32 minutes had passed since the photo was taken. The metadata confirmed it. 40 miles of highway. 40 minutes minimum, probably closer to 50, depending on which route. Lucien put his phone in his pocket. I'm going, he said. Absolutely not. He wants me alone. If I bring an army, he'll what? He's going to hurt her regardless. That's the plan. He hurts her, you come running, you walk into the building alone, and 12 mercenaries take you apart. Cross gets rid of his biggest problem and reclaims the woman he's been obsessed with for 4 years. Victor stepped in front of him. Physically stepped in front of Lucien Vexley, which was something Victor had done exactly twice in 20 years, and both times it had been necessary. Move, Lucien said. No. Vic, listen to me. Victor's voice dropped to something private, something that had nothing to do with chains of command or professional obligation. You go in there alone, you're dead. She's still with him. And everything you've built, every person who depends on this operation, goes with you. Think. I am thinking. You're feeling. There's a difference. You've been feeling since the night of your wedding, and he's been exploiting it every step of the way. Victor's jaw worked. She called him, Lucien. Whatever the reason, whatever she was trying to do, she called him. And now she's in a building 40 miles away, and we have a compromised intelligence source and a second mole we haven't identified. You go in there alone, you might be going in there with a map that Cross drew himself. I know. Then I know, Victor. Lucian's voice cracked the room. Just once. Just enough to stop everything. I know it's a trap. I know he wants me there alone. I know he's been 15 steps ahead since before I met her. He pressed both hands against the kitchen counter and breathed through his nose for 3 seconds. And I know she's in that building because she was trying to end this herself instead of asking for help, because every person who's ever tried to help her has been destroyed. And I know she walked out of here in the dark because she was more afraid of hope than fear. And I know... He stopped. The sentence had run out of road. Victor waited. I know what she said to me through the door, Lucien said quietly. She said she wanted to stop being afraid. And I told her I'd handle it, and she didn't believe me, and I don't blame her. He straightened. His voice came back to its usual register, flat, decided. So we're going, but we're going smart. We're going with everyone, and we're going with a plan. He said, I don't care what he said. He'll hurt her. Lucien looked at Victor with eyes that had run out of every emotion except one, the one that had been building since a wedding night when he saw bruises beneath makeup and a woman bracing for impact from a man who was supposed to be gone from her life. He's already hurting her, Lucien said. He never stopped. The next 40 minutes happened with the compressed, brutal efficiency that characterized Lucien at his best. Lucien operating not from emotion, but from the cold arithmetic of a man who had survived this city by outthinking every threat before it fully materialized. He pulled 3 crews totaling 22 people. No vehicles louder than civilian standard, no tactical trucks, nothing that read as a convoy from a distance. The property layout had one access road, so they weren't using the road. Victor identified a county maintenance path that ran parallel to the east edge of the farmland, overgrown, unlit, wide enough for 2 vehicles, if you didn't mind the fence posts. They went dark. Phones on airplane mode except for Victor's encrypted device. No communications that could be intercepted. No digital footprint from the point of departure forward. Anton Reyes was left behind, under the watch of 2 men, with a cover story about a communications task. Anton didn't know he was under watch. He continued working at his station, and at 10:42 a.m., he made a phone call on his personal cell that Victor's second team intercepted and logged. The call was 40 seconds long. The number traced to the same relay service as Jonas Cade. Anton had confirmed the convoy was coming, which was fine, because Victor had already rerouted them. The convoy left Blackthorn Manor at 10:51 a.m. under a white November sky that sat low and heavy over the city and pressed the cold down into the streets. Lucien rode in the second car with Victor and 2 men he'd trusted for a decade. He kept his phone face down on his knee and his eyes on the highway, unreeling ahead of them, and he didn't think about the photograph of her sitting in a stone room with her hands tied. He couldn't afford to think about that. He thought instead about the building, about angles, about the 14 seconds he'd memorized from the property schematic that Victor had pulled from the county records on his way out the door, about the positioning of his people and the likely positioning of Cross's people and the mathematics of violence that he'd been running his entire life. He did not think about the pearl-handled knife on the table in front of her. He did not think about what that image was designed to tell him. He drove. At 11:23 a.m., the convoy turned off the county road onto the maintenance path. Dead grass scraped the undercarriage of the vehicles. Frost cracked under the tires. The path curved east through the edge of a dead cornfield, the stalks brown and broken, rattling in the cold wind that came off the open land like the land was breathing. The building appeared through the corn stalks as they crept forward. Stone walls, gray and old. The peaked roof against the low white sky. 4 windows visible on the north face, all dark. The bell tower rose at the far end, empty, the opening where the bell had hung now just a rectangular gap in the stone. Victor killed the engine 200 yards out. 22 people moved in silence through the dead corn. Lucien went with them. Victor stayed at his left shoulder. Neither spoke. Their boots made almost no sound on the frozen ground because they were moving slowly, carefully, the way you move towards something you expected to shoot back. They were 120 yards from the north face of the building when Victor put a hand on Lucien's arm. Lucien stopped. Victor pointed. 2 fingers. Then a direction. On the far side of the building, half hidden behind a panel van parked at the corner. A man. Dark clothing, earpiece visible from this distance. Weapon at low ready, facing the access road, watching for a convoy that wasn't coming from that direction. Lucien counted 4 more positions around the perimeter as they moved. 6 men outside. which meant unknown number inside. Cross had said to come alone, which meant Cross had prepared for the eventuality that Lucien wouldn't. 12 mercenaries. That was Jonas's estimate. 6 outside, probably 6 or more inside. 22 against 12. Good odds if everything went right. Everything rarely went right. Lucien crouched in the dead corn 50 yards from the building's north face and looked at the narrow window in the stone wall nearest to him. The glass was dirty and cracked, but not boarded. Through the grime, the flicker of something. Candlelight. Moving. She was in there. His jaw tightened so hard the muscles ached. He turned to Victor and ran a quick series of hand signals. Victor relayed them down the line. People peeled off in pairs, moving to positions. They had one weapon advantage that Cross's team didn't know about. Lucien's people were already inside the kill box, while Cross's perimeter guards were still watching the road. The last thing Lucien did before signaling the advance was reach into his jacket and produce a second knife. Different from the pearl-handled one. Longer. He checked the blade with his thumb. Then he stood up from the dead corn and walked toward the building. 30 yards. 20. 10. His boots on frozen ground, his breathing measured. One of Cross's perimeter guards turned at some instinct, some animal awareness of presence, and his hand was going for his radio when Victor's team hit all 6 exterior positions simultaneously. The noise lasted 4 seconds, then silence. Lucien pushed through the side door of the building into a stone corridor that smelled like cold and rot and old candle wax. The sound of his footsteps changed. Stone floor, high ceiling, the specific acoustic of an abandoned place that had forgotten what human presence felt like. Light at the end of the corridor, candlelight, orange and flickering. He walked toward it. The corridor opened into what had once been a main hall, long, wide, with stone walls and high, narrow windows that let in the white November light in thin gray bars. Candles had been arranged on every surface, ledges, the floor, the remains of wooden furniture stacked at the edges of the room. Dozens of them. The light they produced was theatrical and deliberate, and Lucien felt a spike of cold hatred at the staging of it, at the calculation behind the aesthetics of a man who, even in violence, wanted to be the most interesting presence in the room. At the far end of the hall, near what had once been a raised platform, Seraphina was seated in a wooden chair, hands bound, head bowed, hair down, exactly as the photograph, and Damien Cross stood behind her with one hand resting on her shoulder. He looked like he'd recovered from the gala. The orbital bruise had been handled with something, makeup or time, and his lip had healed to a thin line. He was dressed casually, dark trousers, charcoal sweater. The picture of a man entirely at ease. 6 armed men flanked him in a loose semicircle. "You came," Damien said. He sounded genuinely pleased. "I wasn't sure you would." Lucien stopped walking. He stood in the entrance of the hall and looked at Seraphina, who had raised her head at the sound of his footsteps and was watching him now with an expression he couldn't fully read. Not relief, not shame, something in between, something that contained both and was larger than either. "I came," Lucien said. "Alone? Does it matter?" Damien tilted his head. His hand on Seraphina's shoulder tightened slightly. She didn't react. She kept her eyes on Lucien with that unreadable expression that was slowly, as he watched, becoming something else. Not fear. Not this. Something harder. Brighter. The expression of someone who has stopped bracing and started calculating. "Here's what I want," Damien said, his voice carrying the particular ease of a man reading from a script he'd written months ago. "You sign over the eastern shipping routes, the ports your new in-laws brought into this marriage. Full transfer. My name on the contracts. You withdraw every legal and financial action you've taken against Cross Industries in the last 72 hours, and you dissolve the marriage on grounds of incompatibility." He paused. "And I'll walk away." Lucien looked at him. "And Seraphina?" "She comes with me, obviously." "No." "Lucien." Damien's smile stretched. "Look around. 6 men with weapons. 1 access road you drove down alone. Whatever you have outside, you have one variable I control that you don't." His hand moved from her shoulder to her hair, fingers wrapping in it slowly. "So we're going to have a different conversation than the one you planned." Seraphina's jaw tightened. Her eyes didn't leave Lucien. She was communicating something. He could see the effort of it, the desperate controlled transmission of information across 40 feet of candlelit stone, but he couldn't read it yet. Then he saw her right hand, behind her back, hidden by the angle of the chair and the position of her body. Her right hand was moving, small movements, deliberate. The zip tie was already half off. She'd been working it the whole time. And the pearl-handled knife was no longer on the table in front of her. It was gone from where the photograph had shown it, which meant it wasn't gone. It meant it was somewhere on her person, taken during a moment when Cross's attention was elsewhere, hidden in the way that someone hides a thing they fully intend to use. Lucien understood everything in that single second. She hadn't called Damien to surrender. She hadn't walked out of Blackthorn Manor because she'd given up or been seduced back into his orbit. She had made contact to draw him out, to get him into a location, to put herself in the room with him because she had decided, in the dark, alone, without telling anyone, that the only way to end this was to end it herself. She'd been planning this since before the gala, and she'd done it without asking anyone's permission, because 4 years of Damien Cross had convinced her that no one was coming, that help was a lie, that the only reliable agent in her life was herself. And she was sitting in a chair with her hands half free and a knife somewhere on her body and Damien Cross's fingers in her hair. Lucien felt cold move through him from the chest outward. Not fear, clarity. The specific crystalline clarity that came when all the variables aligned and the only thing left was timing. He looked at Seraphina. Just a glance. Held it for 1 second. Her eyes said, "Now." He looked back at Damien Cross and said, "You want to talk about the shipping routes? Let's talk." And outside, in the dead cornfield, Victor heard Lucien's voice carry through the stone walls of the building, and gave the signal. The signal was a whistle. One short note, barely audible through stone walls, coming from the northeast corner of the building where Victor had positioned 2 men with specific instructions about the ventilation grill on the building's north face. Damien heard it. His head turned. A reflex, a fraction of a second, the involuntary response of a man whose nervous system registered the sound before his brain could process it. That fraction of a second was all Lucien needed. I was already moving when Damien's eyes came back to him. 40 feet of stone floor covered in 4 steps. Not a sprint. Something more controlled, more purposeful. The movement of a man who had done violent things in confined spaces enough times that his body had its own geometry for it. He hit the nearest armed guard with his shoulder before the man's weapon came level, drove him sideways into the stone wall hard enough that the impact echoed off the ceiling, and heard the grunt of air leaving a body as the guard collapsed. The hall erupted. Gunfire from the entrance. Victor's team pushing through the side door, 2 points of entry converging. Cross's 6 men split attention between the door and Lucien, and that split was fatal, because in the time it took them to choose, Lucien had already taken the first man's weapon and put himself between the semicircle and Seraphina. Damien moved fast, faster than Lucien expected. He grabbed Seraphina by the arm and yanked her backward. She was halfway out of the zip tie, but not all the way, and the jerk of his grip caught her off balance and she stumbled, the chair scraping back, her bound hands unable to catch herself. He dragged her toward the back of the hall, toward a door in the stone wall that Lucien hadn't seen in the schematic, a second exit, not on any county record, cut through the original stone sometime in the last decade. Lucien fired once at the doorframe above it, warning, not because he couldn't make the shot. He could, and Damien knew he could, but because Damien was pressed against Seraphina and the geometry was wrong, and a miss at this distance didn't miss cleanly. Damien stopped. The hall was chaos behind Lucien. Gunfire, shouting, the crash of bodies against stone. He could hear Victor's voice cutting through it in short bursts, commanding, directing. He could hear the fight resolving itself by the way the noise changed. Fewer voices, fewer shots, the specific compression of violence being brought under control. He kept his eyes on Damien. Damien had Seraphina in front of him, her back against his chest, his right arm across her collarbone. His left hand held a gun pressed against her ribs. She was breathing in sharp pulls through her nose, not panicking, controlling it. The rhythm of someone who had rehearsed this exact moment in her head so many times it had become muscle memory. Her right hand was free. Lucien could see it, the zip tie hanging from her left wrist. Her right hand flat against her thigh, fingers curled slightly inward, palm pressed against a fold in the dark fabric of her clothes. Where the knife was. She was waiting, holding the knife through the fabric, waiting for the moment. "Put it down," Damien said. His voice had changed. The theatrical ease was gone. What was left was something stripped and functional. The voice of a man in a situation that had departed from his script and was running now on the older, uglier programming underneath. "You're not walking out of here," Lucien said. "Neither is she if you don't put the gun down in the next 3 seconds. You're not going to shoot her. You want to test that?" "Yes," Lucien said, "because you've spent 18 months building this. You don't shoot your end goal. You shoot me, you take her, you disappear. That's the plan. So shoot me." He spread his arms slightly, weapon in one hand, held low. "Go ahead. I'm right here." Damien's jaw flexed. "Or," Lucien said, "you accept that this ended 40 seconds ago when my men came through the door." Behind him, the sounds of the fight had stopped. Complete silence now, except for the creak of the building in the wind and the distant flutter of a candle somewhere near the wall. Lucien heard Victor's footsteps stop somewhere to his left. "How many of yours are still standing?" Lucien asked without turning. "All of ours," Victor said. "None of his." Damien's eyes moved around the hall, taking inventory, calculating. Lucien watched him run the math and watched him arrive at the number that told him the situation was terminal, and watched him decide that terminal didn't mean over. "You think you've won something," Damien said. The gun was still pressed against Seraphina's ribs. "You haven't won anything. You've started a war you don't know how to finish. Morozov is already moving. The South Side staging. Your crews left it unprotected 3 hours ago. By now they own 2 of your distribution corridors, and they have your dock supervisor in a room answering questions." He smiled. The smile was wrong, too wide. The smile of a man bleeding out who still thought he could dictate terms. "You came here for her and gave up the city to do it. How does that feel?" Lucien said nothing. "The council will read that as weakness. Your allies will start doing math about whether you're still worth backing. The Vexley Empire has a shelf life now, and everyone in Chicago is going to feel it. All because you couldn't—" Seraphina moved. She moved without warning, without hesitation, without the telegraphing tremor that 3 years of therapy and 4 weeks in Blackthorn Manor had never fully smoothed out of her. She moved like someone who had made the decision so far in advance that the doing of it was just completion of a thought. Her right hand came up from her thigh with the pearl-handled knife already open. 3 inches of blade. She drove it into Damien's left forearm. Not the side, the underside, through the muscle. And the gun hand spasmed. Not enough to drop the weapon, but enough to break the geometry, to shift the barrel away from her ribs for the half-second that half-seconds are built for. Lucien fired. The shot was precise. High right shoulder. Enough to drop the weapon, not enough to kill. Not yet. Not like this. Not with her in the line of fire. Not in a way that would splatter his blood across her face and give her that image to carry. Damien went backward. The gun hit the stone floor and skidded. His right shoulder gave out and he went down hard, catching himself on his left arm, the stabbed one. And the sound he made when the arm buckled under his weight was short and ugly and entirely without dignity. Seraphina stumbled forward. The zip tie still on her left wrist swung as she moved. She caught herself against the chair, spun, and stood upright facing the room, breathing hard, eyes wide, a thin line of blood on her right hand from where the knife's unguarded spine had cut her during the strike. She looked at Damien on the floor. I was trying to get up. His right arm wasn't working. His left was bleeding fast through the sweater, the dark fabric going darker in an expanding circle around the wound. He pushed himself to a sitting position against the wall and looked up at her with an expression that had shed every layer. The charm, the control, the theatrical confidence, and arrived at something beneath all of it. Something animal. Something that had been running under every version of Damien Cross that had ever existed in any room. "You stabbed me," he said. He sounded genuinely disbelieving, as though in 4 years of damage he'd absorbed the conviction that she was physically incapable of it. Seraphina stood with the knife still in her hand and looked at him and didn't say a word. Her chest heaved. Her hand with the knife trembled slightly. Not with fear, with the come-down of adrenaline that hits after the act and before the processing. Lucien reached her in 3 steps. He put himself between her and Damien without touching her. He turned slightly so he could see both of them. Damien against the wall, his men dealt with. Victor's people filling the hall, the last candles guttering in the disturbance of too many bodies in motion. Seraphina. Lucien's voice was different now, quieter, the operational flatness gone. "Are you hurt?" She looked at her hand, at the thin cut from the knife. "No." Are you sure? I said no. Her voice was shaking, but her eyes were clear. She looked at him directly, and he saw something in them he hadn't seen before. Not gratitude, not relief, but the specific, nearly incandescent look of someone who has just done something they never believed they were capable of doing. You need to step back, he said. She looked at Damien again. Is he? He's alive. He'll stay alive until I decide otherwise. Step back. She stepped back. 2 steps. Her shoulder blades touched Victor's arm, and Victor, who was not a gentleman by any definition, steadied her with one hand and held it there. Lucien crouched in front of Damien. I didn't feel the anger anymore. The thing that had been burning in him since the wedding night, since the surveillance footage, since the photograph and the extraction and the 41 hours of running on fumes and fury, it was still there, but it had stopped burning. It had become something else, something colder and more deliberate. He looked at Damien Cross from 2 feet away. Damien looked back. His shoulder wound was bad. Blood pressure was dropping. The pallor was coming in, the slight unfocusing of the eyes. Without attention, he had maybe 30 minutes before the blood loss became a problem that couldn't be reversed. You want to finish it, Damien said. Not a question. I want to make sure we understand each other first, Lucien said. There's nothing to understand. You won the round. There are no more rounds. You're done. Damien laughed. It came out wet and short. You can't make me done. You kill me. My lawyers have instructions. The offshore accounts activate. Every secret you and the Vexley syndicate have accumulated for the last 10 years goes to 3 separate journalists, 2 federal prosecutors, and a congressional subcommittee. He pressed his good hand against the wall and straightened slightly. I'm not an obstacle you can remove. I'm a trigger. Kill me and you spend the next 5 years watching your empire dismantled by people with subpoenas. The hall was quiet. Victor was listening. Lucien's men were listening. Everyone in that building was listening. So here's what's actually going to happen, Damien continued. His voice was getting thinner, blood pressure doing its slow work, but the precision of it held. The diction of a man who had prepared this speech. You get me to a hospital. You withdraw your attacks on Cross Industries. You take your wife back to Chicago, and we return to being 2 businessmen with no personal dispute. Lucien tilted his head. And Seraphina is mine. His eyes moved past Lucien to where she stood. She always will be. You can build walls and hire armies and sit outside her door every night, and she'll still wake up at 3 a.m. knowing that I'm out there. That's not something you can fix, Vexley. That's not something anyone can fix. I'm already inside her. His voice dropped. I always will be. Lucien stood up. He turned and looked at Seraphina. She was looking at Damien. Her jaw was set. Her eyes were dry. She had the pearl-handled knife still in her hand, and she was looking at the man who had destroyed 4 years of her life, who had engineered an 18-month campaign to trap her in another version of captivity, who was currently bleeding on a stone floor and still trying to reach inside her and rearrange the furniture. He's right, she said. The room went still. About the 3 a.m. part. He's right. Her voice was steady in a way that seemed to cost her something. I do wake up thinking about him. I wake up scared. I wake up checking the door. I probably will for a long time. She looked at Lucien. But he's wrong about what that means. She took 2 steps forward, past Lucien. She stopped 3 feet in front of Damien and crouched to his level and looked at him at close range. Damien's expression changed. Something uncertain moved behind his eyes. The micro-expression of a man whose model of a person has just failed to predict their behavior. I called you, Seraphina said quietly. You know I called you. You thought it meant you still had me. It meant I was done being afraid of calling you. She paused. There's a difference. He stared at her. I walked out of that house knowing you'd bring me here, knowing he'd come. She glanced at Lucien briefly, knowing that whatever happened in this building was the end of it, because I was done waiting for the end to arrive on your schedule. You planned this, Damien said. I stopped surviving and started thinking. You taught me how. You just forgot I was paying attention. His face went through several things. Shock, recalibration, the specific fury of a man confronting the fact that his victim had a more sophisticated interior life than he'd ever credited. And beneath all of it, something older, something that was almost recognition. I'm going to destroy you, he said. Quiet. Direct. Without theatrics, which made it worse. You already did, Seraphina said. I got better. She stood up and walked back to Victor's side. Lucien looked down at Damien Cross for a long moment. The dead man's switch, he said. The lawyers, the accounts, the journalists. Touch me, and it activates within 72 hours. How many people know the access protocol? Enough. Give me a number. Damien said nothing. Lucien nodded slowly. He pulled out his phone and showed Damien the screen. On it was a document, 12 pages, dense with financial data, account numbers, shell company structures, wire transfer records. Damien looked at it, and his face changed. Anton Reyes is compromised, Lucien said. Has been for months. So I stopped using him 40 hours ago and switched to a team out of New York who didn't have a $300,000 debt that you owned. He scrolled through the document with his thumb. Your dead man's switch lives in an offshore account administered by a legal firm in the Cayman Islands. The firm has 4 partners. 2 of them received payments from Cross Industries in the last 18 months. One of them was visited last week by a man matching the description of your head of security. And the access protocol, he scrolled again, requires a biometric confirmation from you personally every 96 hours. You've been out of contact since last night. Damien was very still. That's about 20 hours, Lucien said. So the clock is running, and you're going to give me the override code. I'm not giving you anything. You will. Or what? Lucien put the phone away. Or I let the clock run, and we see what actually happens. My guess is your lawyers follow instructions exactly as written. Information goes to journalists and prosecutors. Cross Industries gets dragged into the worst year of its existence. Morozov loses his funding source and retreats to regroup. My syndicate takes some damage. My lawyers and my political contacts contain most of it. He paused. And you sit in a federal facility somewhere with a shoulder wound and a stabbing on your record and no empire left to come back to. Damien's jaw worked. Or, Lucien said, you give me the code. I dismantle the switch. You receive medical care. And then we have a different conversation about how this ends. A conversation where you let me walk away. A conversation where you walk away with what's left of you. Which is what exactly? Breathing. Lucien's voice held no cruelty. Just the flat arithmetic of a man who had arrived at the simplest possible answer. That's the offer. Breathing. The hall was stone cold and silent. Outside, wind moved through the dead cornfield and pressed against the building's north face with a sound like the world exhaling. Candles threw long shadows. Victor stood at Lucien's shoulder. Seraphina stood beyond him, very still, watching Damien Cross make the calculation. Damien looked at her, one last time. The full weight of 4 years compressed into a look that lasted 3 seconds and communicated everything. The ownership, the obsession, the specific pathology of a man who confused destruction with devotion. Seraphina held his gaze. She didn't flinch. She didn't look away. She just stood there and let him see that there was nothing left in her face that belonged to him. Damien looked at the floor. 749-Kilo Romeo 2, he said. That's the override. Last 7 digits of the primary account plus the security phrase. Your people will figure out the rest. Lucien looked at Victor. Victor was already on the phone. Lucien crouched one more time in front of Damien Cross. The man was pale now, sweat on his upper lip, the blood loss doing its patient work. His eyes were slightly glassy but still focused, still there. Last thing, Lucien said quietly. The woman you had. The one you called yours. Damien looked at him. She was never yours, Lucien said. Not when she was with you, not after, not ever. I want you to hear that from someone who knows the difference. He stood up and walked away. The medics came in through the side entrance. 2 of them, part of Lucien's convoy, standing by in the vehicles for exactly this contingency. They moved past Lucien and reached Damien without urgency but with competence, cutting the sweater away from his shoulder, assessing the stab wound in his forearm, running the rapid calculations of field medicine. Lucien walked to the far side of the hall and stood near the narrow window. The white November sky. The dead cornfield. The absolute ordinariness of a world that continued existing outside of everything that had just happened in this room. He heard footsteps behind him, light ones. He recognized the rhythm of them before she spoke. You came, Seraphina said. I said I would. You didn't know I was here by choice. I knew by the time I saw the footage. He turned. She was standing 6 feet away. Her face was clean of whatever composure she'd been maintaining for the past however many hours. It had dropped away, and what was underneath was exhaustion, deep and visible and honest. The exhaustion of someone who has been running on manufactured courage for so long, the machinery has finally given out. "I should have told you," she said. "What I was planning, I should have—" Yes, the single word stopped her. "You should have," he said. Not cruel, not a lecture, just direct. "You made a decision that put you in a building 40 miles from anyone who could help you, with a man who's been hurting you for 4 years, betting everything on a plan you built alone." He paused. "You made it work. This time. Next time. There won't be a next time. No, there won't." He held her eyes. "But if there's something that comes after this, anything, for either of us, I need you to understand that doing things alone isn't a virtue. It's a habit you built because the alternative kept getting people hurt. And I'm not those people." She looked at him for a long time. Her right hand still held the knife loosely at her side. The cut across her palm had dried to a thin, dark line. Her hair was loose and tangled, and there were shadows under her eyes that made her look both older and younger at once. "I know," she said. It was a small thing, 2 words, but they carried the specific weight of a person who means them. Victor appeared at the entrance to the hall. "Code checks out. The switch has been neutralized. His accounts are frozen, and the legal firm has been contacted regarding their professional obligations." He glanced at Damien, now being stabilized by the medics. "Morozov's situation is contained. Southside crews pushed back their advance when our people returned. It's messy, but manageable." "And the council?" Lucien asked. "Waiting." "Let them wait." Victor nodded and stepped back. Lucien looked at Seraphina's hand, at the cut. He reached into his jacket and produced a folded cloth, clean, white, the kind he kept out of a habit too old to explain, and held it out. She looked at it. Then she held out her hand. He wrapped the cloth around her palm carefully. His hands were still cut from the gala. Split knuckles, 2 of them reopened from tonight. Blood on both their hands, dried and new. He tied off the cloth without looking up. "Can you walk?" he asked. "Yes. Then let's go home." They walked out of the building side by side into the cold white air of a November morning that smelled like frozen grass and distance. The convoy was spread across the maintenance path. Engines running, people moving with the compressed efficiency of a situation being closed down and cataloged. Victor was on 3 phones simultaneously. Someone was photographing the exterior for documentation. The medic's vehicle was back to the side entrance for Damien. Seraphina stopped walking when they reached the edge of the dead cornfield. She looked back at the building. Lucien stopped beside her. He didn't rush her. He put his hands in his jacket pockets and looked at the building too, and waited for whatever she needed to do in this moment. She stood there for 40 seconds, looking at the stone walls and the bell tower and the narrow windows and the cold gray sky above it all. 40 seconds of something that wasn't grief and wasn't triumph, but existed in the same territory as both. Then she turned away. She didn't look back again. The drive to Chicago took 53 minutes. Seraphina sat in the second car with Lucien and didn't speak for the first 20. The city appeared slowly on the horizon. First the smudge, then the shapes, then the specific geometry of downtown resolving out of the gray afternoon. When she finally spoke, her voice was quiet and had the texture of something she'd been holding for a while. "What happens now?" "To him? He'll be treated, then transferred to a facility where he'll face federal charges for the financial crimes we documented. The physical? What he did to you. That's harder. His lawyers will work on it. But the financial charges are airtight. He'll do time. Will he come back?" "Not in any form that matters." She nodded slowly. "And Morozov?" "A problem for next week." "And the council?" "Also a problem for next week." She almost smiled. It didn't fully form, but the shape of it was there. The precursor to a smile, the muscles beginning the movement before the signal fully arrived. "You have a lot of problems for next week," she said. "I always do." The city wrapped around them as the convoy came off the highway. Streets and lights, and the specific noise of Chicago in the middle of a Tuesday afternoon. A city that didn't know what had happened 40 miles south of it, and wouldn't. The things that happened in stone buildings on dead farmland stayed there. Lucien's phone had 47 unread messages and 11 missed calls. He didn't look at it. Seraphina looked at her wrapped hand, at the cloth tied neatly around her palm. "He said I'd never stop being afraid of him," she said. I know. He's probably not completely wrong. Probably not. But being afraid of something and being controlled by it are different things. She looked up. I've been confusing them for 4 years. Lucien looked at her. The afternoon light through the car window caught the auburn in her hair and the cut on her hand and the circles under her eyes, and all of it together made her look like something that had been through a fire and come out the other side still recognizably itself. He thought of a dozen things to say. He said none of them, because she didn't need any of them. Not right now. Not on this specific Tuesday afternoon with Chicago assembling itself around the car, and 40 miles of distance between her and the building where something that had lasted 4 years had finally come to its end. What she needed right now was the thing he'd been learning, slowly and badly, since a wedding night in November. Silence. Proximity. Presence without demand. He turned back to the window. The car moved through the city. Blackthorn Manor appeared ahead. The iron gates, the drive, the stone facade that had been his fortress for 7 years. The gates opened as the convoy approached. Seraphina sat up slightly. She looked at the building the way she had in those first weeks, assessing, cataloging, calibrating the difference between a place that held her and a place that protected her. Then she looked at Lucien. I want to talk to Elena, she said. Tonight, when this is over. I want to talk to her myself. Okay. And I want a phone. My own phone. Not monitored. Okay. And I want... She stopped, pressed her lips together, recalibrated. I want to make decisions. About this. About what comes next. I don't want them made for me, even well-intentioned ones. The car pulled through the gates. The drive crunched under the tires. The convoy spread out across the courtyard, and people began emerging from vehicles and the machinery of the syndicate restarting around them. Lucien looked at her. What are you asking me? She met his eyes steadily. I'm asking you what this is. What we are. Now that it's over. Because I'm not going back to being an arrangement, and I'm not going to be protected like something valuable and fragile. And I need to know. Her voice caught, just barely, just enough. Whether you want me here or whether you want to win, because they're not the same thing. The car stopped. Outside, Victor was opening doors and issuing instructions, and the world was beginning its process of reconstituting normalcy over the wreckage of the last 48 hours. In approximately 20 minutes, Lucien would need to be on calls with 3 captains, a lawyer, and 2 political contacts. In approximately 4 hours, the council would need answers. He had 30 seconds. He turned to face her fully. The afternoon light and the shadow of the manor and the specific quality of her gaze, direct, exhausted, completely without performance, all of it together made the room inside the car feel smaller than it was. I sat outside your door every night for 3 weeks, he said. I've been shot at twice before, and I never left a room as fast as I left a bed when someone told me you were gone this morning. He paused. His voice had that slight roughness of a man who had chosen every word carefully and was choosing these last ones more carefully than all the others. I don't know what I am or what I'm capable of being. I've never been anything but dangerous, but I know the difference between wanting to keep something and wanting to protect something. She waited. I want to protect you, he said. The rest I don't know yet. It wasn't everything. It wasn't close to everything. But it was the first completely honest thing he had ever said to her without a wall between them. Seraphina held his gaze for a long moment. She inhaled slowly. Let it out. Then she opened the car door and stepped out into the cold afternoon air of Blackthorn Manor. Lucien got out on his side. They walked across the courtyard side by side, not touching, not speaking, moving through the dispersing crowd of their people toward the entrance of the manor. And the distance between them had changed. Not closed, not bridged, but changed. The nature of the space between 2 people shifting from barrier to possibility. Elena was at the door. She looked at Seraphina, then at Lucien. Her expression ran through 4 things in rapid succession: relief, guilt, assessment, and something that lived very close to the thing that replaced guilt, when the person you wronged comes back alive. Seraphina walked straight to her and stopped. She looked at Elena for a long moment. Then she said, "Put the kettle on. I need to tell you something." Elena nodded once. She stepped back. Seraphina walked past her into the house. Lucien paused in the doorway. He looked at Victor across the courtyard. Victor, who had been managing 17 things simultaneously, and would need direction on 14 of them within the hour. Victor looked back at him. "Give me 5 minutes," Lucien said. He went inside. He found Seraphina standing in the kitchen. She'd set the wrapped cloth from her hand on the counter and was running cold water over the cut, watching the water run pink and then clear. She looked up when he came in but didn't speak. He walked to the counter across from her, leaned against it, arms crossed. She turned off the water, dried her hand carefully. "The council," she said. "The Morozov situation. Your problems for next week." "I'll handle them." "I know you will." She picked up the cloth and set it aside. "I want to understand what you handle. All of it. I'm married to this world. I'm not going to pretend I'm not." She looked at him directly. "I want to understand it." Lucien uncrossed his arms. It was a large thing to say in a kitchen on a Tuesday afternoon. It was one of the largest things anyone had ever said to him, because it was the only version of "I trust you" that could mean anything coming from her. Not the easy kind, not the blind kind. The specific, eyes-open kind that said, "I know what you are and I'm not looking away." He picked up his phone from the counter. "Then we'll start tonight," he said. He turned to go back to the courtyard. He was 2 steps from the door when her voice came quietly behind him. "Lucien." He stopped. "For the record," she said, "when I walked out that door last night, I looked back." A pause. "I was looking for you." He stood with his back to her, and the afternoon light from the kitchen windows fell across the floor between them, and the kettle began to heat, and somewhere outside Victor was managing the collapsing and rebuilding of an empire, and all of it, was exactly as complex and exactly as simple as it had always been. He turned around. She was standing at the counter with her cut hand wrapped, and her hair loose, and her eyes clear, and something in them that was just beginning, just barely, just tentatively, to look like the kind of thing that follows 4 years of being told that love is a wound. Like maybe it didn't have to be. Lucien opened his mouth, and his phone rang. Victor's number. 3 rapid callbacks in 5 seconds, the signal they'd established 20 years ago for the category of emergency that couldn't wait. He looked at the phone, looked at her. She nodded once. "Go." He answered the call and walked back into the cold air of the courtyard, and whatever had just started in a kitchen on a Tuesday afternoon went with him, small, fragile, alive, into the noise and wreckage of everything that still needed to be survived. The call lasted 11 minutes. Lucien stood in the courtyard of Blackthorn Manor with the cold November air pressing against the back of his neck, and listened to Victor lay out the damage in the precise, emotionless cadence of a man delivering a battlefield report. The Morozov advance on the south side had been pushed back but not eliminated. 2 of Lucien's distribution corridors had changed hands during the 41 hours he'd spent dismantling Cross's operation, and retaking them would require a level of force that would draw attention from people who were paid to notice that kind of thing. 3 of his council members had already been in contact with Victor directly, bypassing Lucien entirely, which was the organizational equivalent of a vote of no confidence delivered in a language that predated formal voting. And Damien Cross, stabilized by the field medics, and now in transit to a private medical facility on the north side under Lucien's supervision, had apparently regained enough coherence in the vehicle to make one phone call before Anton Reyes, still under watch at the manor, could intercept it. The number called was one of the 3 journalists in Cross's Dead Man Switch protocol. The override code had neutralized the automatic trigger, but it hadn't neutralized Damien's hands and voice and the 14 years of cultivated media relationships that existed entirely outside any digital system. "What did he say?" Lucien asked. "We don't know yet. The call was 40 seconds. Get me a transcript. Working on it." "And the journalist?" "Rebecca Holt, investigative reporter at the Tribune. She's been working the organized crime beat for 8 years. Lucien closed his eyes briefly. Rebecca Holt. He knew the name. She was good, careful. The kind of reporter who didn't run a story until she had 4 sources and 3 lawyers reviewing the copy. A 40-second call from a wounded Damien Cross wouldn't give her a story, but it would give her a thread. And Rebecca Holt was exactly the kind of person who followed threads. "Handle it," Lucien said. "Not through pressure. Find out what he gave her, and figure out what she already had independently. I want to know our exposure before we decide anything." "And the council?" "Tonight, 8 o'clock. Tell them all to be here." He hung up and stood in the cold for a moment longer than necessary. The courtyard had emptied. His people dispersed back to their positions and tasks. The convoy vehicles moved to the side lot. Just the gravel and the iron gate and the gray sky bearing down on everything. He went inside. The kitchen was empty. Elena's kettle had been moved off the heat. 2 used mugs sat in the sink. Elena and Seraphina had had their conversation and moved on. Lucien stood in the kitchen alone and looked at the cloth he'd wrapped around Seraphina's hand, now sitting folded on the counter, and thought about what she'd said. "I was looking for you." He picked up the cloth, set it back down, walked out. He found her in the library on the 2nd floor, a room she hadn't used in the weeks she'd been here, a room he almost never used either, a room that existed in Blackthorn Manor as a gesture toward the kind of person who owned this house in the imagination of whoever had designed it. Floor-to-ceiling shelves, a fireplace. 2 leather chairs positioned to face each other at an angle that suggested the room had been built for conversations worth having. She was in one of these chairs with a blanket across her lap and a book open in her hands that she wasn't reading. She looked up when he came in. "How bad?" she asked. He sat in the other chair. "Manageable." That's not an answer. He looked at her. She was right. It wasn't. It was the answer he gave to subordinates and political contacts and people who needed reassurance more than information. She'd told him she wanted to understand his world. She'd meant it. 2 distribution corridors lost to a Russian syndicate that's been funded by Cross for the past year, 3 council members circling. A journalist who may or may not have enough to start digging. He leaned back in the chair. All of it fixable, none of it free. She absorbed this with the focused attention of someone filing information carefully. The journalist, is she going to be hurt? No? The answer was immediate and flat. That's not how I operate. I know. She said it without hesitation, without the qualifying pause he might have expected, and the absence of the pause was its own statement. She may run a story, he said, depending on what Cross gave her. If she does, it creates problems. Legal exposure, political pressure, leverage for the council members who are already making noise. What kind of problems? The kind that require lawyers and patience and a very careful 18 months. He looked at the fireplace. The grate was empty. No one had lit a fire in this room since he couldn't remember when. The kind that don't end with anyone in a stone building on a dead cornfield. Just people in suits arguing in rooms. You say that like it's easier. In some ways it's harder. She turned the unread book over in her lap. Her cut hand was wrapped with a fresh bandage now. Elena's work, neater than his cloth. She looked at it briefly and then at him. "I talked to Elena," she said. "I know. She told me things about you before, when you were young." Lucien said nothing. "The shirt," Seraphina said carefully, "with the blood, when you were 9. The room was very quiet. Outside, wind moved against the library windows in slow, irregular gusts." Lucien kept his eyes on the empty fireplace grate and let the silence have the space it needed. "She said you came to her because you had no one else," Seraphina said. "She said you never told her what happened. You just handed her the shirt and stood there and waited to see what she would do." "That's accurate." "What did happen?" "I was quiet for a long time. Long enough that she had begun to accept he wouldn't answer when he spoke. "My father," he said. 1 word, 2 syllables, containing everything and nothing. She didn't push. He looked at his hands, the split knuckles, the dried blood, the scars that had accumulated over a decade and a half of being exactly what he was. He turned them over slowly, palms up, the way you'd examine something you'd been carrying so long you'd forgotten what it looked like. "I wasn't Damien Cross," Lucien said. "He wasn't calculated about it. He was just a man with a temper and a bottle and no particular philosophy about either one." He paused. "My mother left when I was 6. Elena was our housekeeper then. She was the first person who cleaned me up without asking what the alternative was." Seraphina was very still. "I became what I am partly because of him, and partly to make sure no one else could ever do to me what he did. And I built something real and ugly and effective, and it worked." He looked up. "Until a Tuesday night in November when a woman in an ivory dress flinched at a brush of my hand, and I recognized the flinch." She held his gaze. Her eyes were very clear and very tired and very present. "That's why you sat outside the door," she said. "Partly." "What's the other part?" He took a breath. Let it out. "The other part is something I don't have a clean answer for yet." It was the most honest thing he'd said about himself in 15 years, and it cost him in the specific way that honest things always cost. Not in the saying, but in the afterward, when the words were out and living in the room and you couldn't take them back. Seraphina looked at him for a long moment. Then she reached across the space between the two chairs and put her unbandaged hand on top of his. She didn't grip it. She didn't squeeze it. She just placed her hand on his, very lightly, the way you set something fragile down, and left it there. The fire in the grate was unlit, and the library was cold, and outside Chicago was assembling its evening under a low gray sky, and everything that needed to be dealt with was still there, waiting, with the patience of things that don't go away. But for 40 seconds in a library that no one used, two people with matching damage sat in leather chairs and didn't say anything, and the silence between them wasn't empty. Lucien turned his hand over slowly beneath hers and held it. The council meeting at 8 o'clock was the ugliest thing to happen at Blackthorn Manor since Lucien had taken over the syndicate at 22. 12 men in an oak-paneled room that smelled like bourbon and old money, and the specific anxiety of powerful people who had been reminded that power is conditional. 3 of them, Caruso, Delgado, and a man named Whitmore who controlled the Northwest Corridor, sat together on one side of the table in a physical arrangement that made their position clear before anyone spoke. Lucien sat at the head of the table alone. Victor stood at the door. That was the full extent of his visible support in the room, and he'd arranged it that way deliberately. Caruso spoke first because Caruso always spoke first. He was 63, heavy, with the careful vowels of a man who had spent decades softening a South Side accent into something boardroom adjacent. The South Side situation, Caruso said. 2 corridors. How long to retake? 2 weeks, Lucien said. Cost? Significant. Manageable. The journalist. Being monitored. No story yet. Likely no story that constitutes an operational threat. Cross. In custody, effectively. Federal charges pending. His syndicate is dissolved. His funding to Morozov is cut. Caruso looked at the other two. Whitmore cleared his throat. The issue isn't the resolution of the Cross situation. The issue is the 48 hours that preceded it. Then say that, Lucien said. Whitmore shifted in his chair. He was 57, lean, with the dry precision of a man who had spent 40 years carefully, never being the most dangerous person in any room. You pulled assets away from operational positions to resolve a personal matter. You left the South Side exposed. You made an emotional decision that created measurable organizational damage. The word emotional landed in the room with the weight of an accusation. Yes, Lucien said. The word surprised everyone, including Whitmore, whose prepared follow-up visibly stalled behind his eyes. The decision had an emotional component, Lucien continued. It also had a strategic one. Cross was building a private military operation funded by a competing syndicate, using a woman in my household as leverage. Leaving that unresolved was a longer-term organizational threat than 2 corridors lost for 2 weeks. He looked at Whitmore steadily. The personal and the strategic weren't separate. You're welcome to disagree with how I weighted them. A pause. And the woman? Delgado asked. He was the youngest of the 3 dissenters, mid-40s, sharp, the one Lucien actually respected. Your wife. What's her role going forward? The alliance with the Veil Network is contingent on the marriage. But the marriage is, Lucien said. Delgado looked at him. The marriage is, Lucien repeated. Present tense. That's not relevant to this council. Another pause, longer. The 12 men in the room performed the collective calculation of people who have spent their careers reading power dynamics, and were now trying to read this one. Caruso leaned back in his chair. He looked at Lucien with the assessing gaze of someone who had known him for 12 years and was currently revising something. The South Side, Caruso said finally. 2 weeks. You'll have the full support of my crews. Whitmore and Delgado exchanged a look. Something passed between them that Lucien couldn't fully read but recognized as the sound of a majority dissolving. Mine as well, Delgado said. Whitmore said nothing for 4 seconds. Then, the Northwest Corridor stays independent until the Morozov situation is resolved. After that, we talk. It was less than full support and more than opposition. In the language of this room, it was an acceptable resolution. Lucien stood. We're done. The council filed out. Caruso was the last to leave. At the door, he paused and looked back at Lucien with an expression that existed somewhere between respect and a kind of tired recognition. Your father, Caruso said. He made every decision with that emotion you're accused of. Rage, mostly. Made him unpredictable. Made him weak. He paused. You've always been better than him. Don't confuse the two. He left. Victor closed the door. Lucien stood at the head of the empty table for a moment. Then he sat back down in the chair and pressed both hands flat on the wood and breathed. He was 48 hours without real sleep. His shoulder ached from the impact against Cross's guard in the hall. His hands were split and swollen. The bourbon in the decanter on the sideboard was exactly as far away as it needed to be. He poured a glass and didn't drink it, just held it and looked at the amber liquid and thought about Caruso's last sentence, the distinction he'd drawn. The implication that whatever Lucien had done in the past 48 hours could still be something other than what his father was. He thought about Seraphina's hand on top of his in the library. The specific weight of it, how it had felt different from anything else he could compare it to. Not possession, not performance, just the quiet, radical act of one damaged person choosing to be in contact with another. He poured the bourbon back into the decanter and left the room. The next 2 weeks were the kind of work that didn't make for stories. No confrontations in stone buildings. No photographs delivered to phones in the dark. No violence that required anything more dramatic than a phone call and a deadline. The South Side corridors were retaken through a combination of economic pressure, strategic inconvenience, and the careful application of leverage in 3 directions simultaneously. Morozov, without Cross's funding, retreated to regroup, a withdrawal that bought time without solving the underlying problem. But time was the resource Lucien needed most. The journalist, Rebecca Holt, made contact, not through the newspaper, directly. An email to Lucien's legal team outlining what she had and what she was pursuing, and pointedly, what she would accept in exchange for a longer timeline. It was professional. It was the kind of move made by someone who understood that the story she was sitting on was worth more if she got it right than if she got it first. Lucien's lawyer spent 4 days in a room with her lawyers and emerged with an arrangement that served everyone's interests without serving anyone's entirely. Damien Cross was transferred from the private medical facility to federal custody on a Tuesday, 9 days after the building on the dead cornfield. The charges were financial, wire fraud, money laundering, conspiracy, the kind of charges that didn't play well in tabloids but carried 15 to 20 years in facilities where a man like Damien Cross would spend his sentence being precisely as afraid as he had made other people. He didn't make any more phone calls. The night before the transfer, Lucien told Seraphina, they were in the kitchen. It was late, past 11, and she'd been awake because the nightmares had come back 2 nights in a row, and she'd stopped trying to force sleep at midnight. She was at the counter with tea, and he came in from the study still in his work clothes with his tie pulled loose and his eyes carrying the weight of 14 consecutive days of systemic problem solving. He told her about the federal charges, the timeline, what it meant practically. She listened. She didn't cry. She held the mug with both hands and listened with the focused stillness of someone receiving information they had earned the right to. Will he serve the full term? She asked. Probably not the full term. His lawyers are exceptional, but somewhere between 8 and 12 years is realistic. And when he gets out, he'll be 62 years old with no empire, no funding network, and a federal record. Lucien paused. And I'll still be here. She looked at him. The implication of the last sentence settled between them. I don't want to spend the rest of my life needing someone to protect me, she said. I know. I want to be able to walk into a room and not count the exits. That's going to take time. It's probably going to take a good therapist and more time than either of us would prefer. I know. She wrapped her hands tighter around the mug. Elena gave me a name, someone she knows. A therapist in Lincoln Park. Good. She's not cheap. I don't care. She almost smiled again. The shape of it, the almost smile, was something he'd started cataloging. The specific angle of the left corner of her mouth, the slight softening around her eyes. It appeared more frequently now than it had in November, still more rare than it should be for a person's face. But the trajectory was visible. There's something I need to tell you, she said. He waited. My uncle Marcus. When the arrangement was made, the marriage, the alliance, he told me it was a business decision, that I'd be taken care of, that Lucien Vexley was a hard man, but a man of his word. She set down the mug. He didn't tell me what he knew about Damien. He knew. Not everything, but enough. He knew Damien's reputation, and he didn't factor it into the arrangement because it wasn't relevant to the shipping routes. The kitchen was very quiet. I found out 3 weeks ago, she said. Elena helped me access my own family's correspondence through channels I probably shouldn't have had access to. Lucien looked at her. Elena did. Elena is more resourceful than she appears. He filed that away. What do you want to do with it? I don't know yet. He's family. He's also the person who handed me to Damien because the math worked out. She pressed her lips together. I wanted you to know before I decided anything, because it affects the alliance. And you told me I was part of this world now. It was the most sophisticated thing anyone had brought to him in a council context in years. She'd gone from a woman who couldn't eat a meal without checking the room to someone running parallel intelligence operations through his own housekeeper and thinking 3 moves ahead about the organizational implications of what she'd found. He thought about what Caruso had said about his father, about the distinction between rage and judgment. Tell me everything you found, he said. She told him. It took 40 minutes and a second cup of tea and 2 sessions where she had to stop and collect herself because revisiting the correspondence meant revisiting the specific moment of realizing that the person who should have protected her had treated her protection as a line item. By the end, she was dry-eyed and steady and had the look of someone who has swallowed something very bitter and is refusing to let it show. Lucien listened to all of it without interrupting. When she finished, he was quiet for a moment. Marcus Vale stays untouched, he said. For now. The alliance is more valuable than the grievance, but you're going to be present in every conversation I have with him going forward, not as his niece, as my wife, as a party to the agreement. He paused. And he's going to know that you know. She absorbed this. That's not nothing. No, it's not justice, but it's something real. Is that how your world works? Something real instead of justice? He looked at her. Usually, sometimes you get both. She picked up both mugs and walked them to the sink. She stood with her back to him, washing them with a care that had nothing to do with the mugs and everything to do with giving her hands something to do while the rest of her processed. My friend Rebecca, she said without turning around. The one who lost her apartment and her custody case when she tried to help me. Damien arranged all of it. I know he did. I could never prove it. What do you need? She turned off the water, dried her hands, turned around. I don't need anything. I want to know if her custody case can be revisited. Tell me her full name. I'll have someone look at the original case within the week. She looked at him for a long moment. Not with gratitude. Not exactly. With the expression of someone recalibrating what they thought was possible. Lucien Vexley, she said quietly. Doing something for a woman he's never met. I've done worse for less. That's not what I... She stopped, shook her head slightly. Thank you. Don't thank me. Tell me her name. She told him. He typed it into his phone. She watched him do it with an expression that did something complicated around the eyes. Winter settled properly over Chicago in December. The kind of winter that came without apology and stayed without consideration. Deep cold, frequent snow, the city going gray and white, and the lake churning under a sky the color of old iron. Seraphina started therapy in the second week of December. She went on Tuesdays and said very little about what happened in those sessions, except that they were hard, and that hard was probably right. She came back from the second session with her eyes red and her jaw tight and went directly to the library and sat in her chair for an hour alone. Lucien left a cup of tea outside the library door and didn't knock. The cup was gone when he passed again an hour later. On a Wednesday morning in the third week of December, Lucien came downstairs at 6:30 to find Seraphina already in the kitchen. She'd made coffee, real coffee, not the instant she'd been surviving on, and there were 2 cups on the counter, and she was standing at the window looking out at the snow-covered garden. He stopped in the kitchen doorway and looked at the 2 cups. She turned around, pushed one toward him. He walked to the counter and picked it up. They stood on opposite sides of the kitchen island and drank coffee in the gray early morning, and outside the snow sat pristine on the grounds of Blackthorn Manor, covering the frozen grass and the garden paths in the east garden, where a camera had been looped on a November night that felt like a different year. I had a dream last night, she said. He waited. Not a nightmare, just a dream. I was in this kitchen, making coffee, and there was nothing. Nothing else in the dream. No doors to check. No one behind me. She looked at the window. Just coffee and a window? He looked at his cup. It's the first normal dream I've had in 4 years, she said. The kitchen clock ticked. Outside, a bird made some sound in the frozen garden. A small thing, Winter sparse, barely there. The coffee was good, strong. She'd made it the way he'd made it every morning, and she'd been paying attention. He didn't say anything, because there was nothing to say that the silence didn't already contain. She looked at him across the island. "What do you do on Sundays?" she asked. The question was so ordinary it took him a second to register it. What? Sundays. When there's no crisis. When the phone isn't ringing. What do you actually do? He thought about it. Drive sometimes. North Shore. When it's not... He glanced at the window. Like this. When it's not winter. When it's not winter. And what else? He looked at her. I don't have a good answer for that. I didn't think so. She wrapped both hands around her mug. I want to learn the city, she said. Not the version you run. Not the operational geography. Just Chicago. The actual city. The parts that exist for people who don't have empires. I'm not sure I know those parts. Then we'll figure them out. He looked at her. She was standing in his kitchen in December with her hair loose and a coffee mug and a bandage on one hand, and the very beginnings of something in her expression that was slowly becoming recognizable as a person who was starting, tentatively and with appropriate suspicion, to want things from the future, instead of just survival from the present. Okay, he said. She looked at the window again. The snow kept falling. 3 months after the November wedding, on a Saturday in late February, Lucien drove north on Lake Shore Drive, with the heater running and Seraphina in the passenger seat, watching the lake through the window. The water was steel gray and choppy, winter rough, with whitecaps running toward the shore and breaking in sheets of cold spray against the rock barriers. She had her forehead against the window. Her breath made a small fog patch that appeared and disappeared. She'd been quiet for most of the drive. Not the old quiet, the armored kind, but something looser. The quiet of a person who didn't feel the need to monitor themselves continuously. He'd noticed the difference. He'd been noticing differences for weeks, and cataloging them without comment the way you document the progress of something you're not willing to jinx by naming. She slept through most nights now. The nightmares came still, maybe twice a week, maybe less, but she managed them differently. She didn't wake up in the crash of full panic the way she had in November. She woke up, sat with the darkness for a few minutes, and went back to sleep. He knew because he heard her through the wall, because his room was directly across from hers now, and whatever portion of him had spent 3 weeks in a hallway had never fully stood down. She told him once, in the clinical tone she sometimes used when talking about herself as if describing someone else, that trauma didn't disappear. That the neural pathways that fear carved into a brain were physical structures that healed slowly and sometimes incompletely, and that the goal wasn't erasure but management. She'd said it matter-of-factly, in the kitchen, the way you report weather. He'd listened and said nothing and filed it next to everything else. He was slowly learning about who she was when no one was trying to break her. He took the drive up to the North Shore and parked on a gravel strip overlooking a section of beach that was empty and wind-scoured and objectively miserable in late February. Snow on the sand, ice at the water's edge, the kind of cold that got into the gaps of your coat. They got out anyway. She walked to the water's edge and stood with the wind hitting her straight in the face and her coat pulled tight and her hair whipping sideways. He stood 6 feet away and looked at the lake and felt the cold against his jaw. After a while, she said without turning, "The building in Kankakee, are they really turning it into a shelter?" He looked at her profile. The question had come from somewhere she'd been sitting with for a while. "The paperwork is in process. Elena's been managing the organizational side. There's a woman named Dr. Reyes who runs a nonprofit on the west side. She'll administer it." "How long?" 6 months to open, maybe 8. She nodded slowly. The lake threw spray across the ice at the shoreline. She watched it. "I want to be involved," she said. "Not as a donor. Not as a name on a letterhead. Actually involved. Define involved. I want to talk to the women who come there. I want to be a person they can talk to." She turned to look at him. "I know what it looks like from inside it. I know what it feels like when someone tells you you're going to be okay, and you know they've never had a reason to doubt it themselves." She paused. "I want to be the other kind of person in that room." He looked at her for a long moment. The wind moved her hair across her face, and she pushed it back with one hand, the healed one, the scar from the knife barely visible in the February light. "I'll make the call Monday," he said. She looked back at the lake. Something passed across her face that he'd been watching develop over the past 3 months. A quality that wasn't happiness exactly, but was the structural precursor to it. The thing that gets built first, in the foundation, before anything else can stand. Lucien. I don't know what this is. She gestured vaguely between them. Between us. I don't have a word for it yet. You don't need one yet. That's a very convenient answer for a man who doesn't like talking about himself. He looked at the lake. Probably. She was quiet. Then, when I left the manor, that night, when I went to the building, she exhaled. Not a sigh, just a long breath. I wasn't only trying to end it. Part of me was testing it. Testing what? Whether you'd come. She said it plainly, without self-pity. The observation of someone who had examined their own behavior with the unsentimental thoroughness of someone who'd spent enough sessions in a Tuesday room to stop lying to themselves. I'd spent 4 years being told that no one would come, that leaving meant being alone, that any plan I made would be dismantled, and I needed to know whether that was still true. She turned to look at him, whether it would ever not be true. He held her gaze. It cost me something to go alone, she said. I know that. I know it put people in danger, and I know it was the kind of decision that came from being trained to distrust help. I'm not... She stopped, started again. I'm telling you because you deserve to know why. Not to justify it, just to explain it. I know why, he said. Do you? You needed evidence, not a promise. Evidence. He looked back at the lake. I can't be angry at someone for needing evidence. She watched him from the side for a moment. You came, she said. I came. The lake moved. The cold moved. A seagull appeared from somewhere and went overhead and disappeared into the gray. The kind of moment that doesn't announce itself as significant while it's happening. Lucien turned from the lake and looked at her. Full on. The way he rarely looked at things, without the peripheral awareness he usually maintained. The constant calibration of exits and angles. Just her. The wind and the cold and the healed hand and the almost smile that was almost a real smile now. I'm going to be difficult, he said. I don't talk about things. I make decisions that affect both of us without sufficient consultation. I have 17 enemies in this city on any given Tuesday, and the number fluctuates. I was raised by someone who demonstrated conclusively that I should never take the next 30 minutes for granted. He paused. I don't know how to be with someone. I've never tried. She was listening. But I sat outside your door for 3 weeks because I couldn't not, he said. And I know the difference between those two things well enough to know which one means something. She looked at him for a long moment. The lake was steel gray and the sky was iron gray, and the beach was white and empty, and everything about the scene was cold and stripped down and real in the specific way that February is real, without ornament, without performance, just the bare conditions. She stepped forward, 1 step. Enough to close the distance. She put her hand against his chest. Flat. The healed one. Feeling the warmth through his coat. She raised her eyes to his face and held them there. I know what you are, she said. I've known for a while now. And? And I'm still here. He put his hand over hers, against his own chest, holding it there. The cold moved around them and didn't get between them. They stood on the beach in late February for a while after that, not talking, not doing anything that required a name, just standing with the lake in front of them and Chicago somewhere behind them and the particular specific silence of two people who have survived the same storm from different sides and found themselves, improbably, on the same beach. Eventually she shivered. He felt it through the coat. Cold, he said. Freezing. This is an objectively terrible beach in February. You wanted to see the city. I wanted to see the city, not die in it. He almost smiled. The shape of it, unfamiliar, unpracticed, arriving on a face that had forgotten the architecture, was almost identical to hers. They walked back to the car. She got in first. He started the engine and let the heat come up. She tucked her hands between her knees and watched the lake through the windshield for a moment. Next Sunday, she said. What about it? Somewhere with actual heat. He pulled out onto the road. The city appeared ahead of them as he turned south. First the North Shore suburbs, then the density increasing, then the skyline emerging from the gray like something that had always been there and always would be. There's a place in Hyde Park, he said. Cuban food. I've driven past it for 6 years and never stopped. She turned to look at him. You've driven past a Cuban restaurant for 6 years. I don't... He paused. I'm not good at stopping for things. She looked at him for a moment. You stopped for me, she said. He kept his eyes on the road. Yes, he said. The city came up around them. Lakeshore Drive ran south between the water and the buildings, the gray lake on one side and Chicago on the other. And somewhere in the middle of it, in a car going 50 miles an hour through a February afternoon, the most feared man in the city drove his wife home through a world that had cost them both something they couldn't get back, and kept whatever it was they'd managed to build in its place. Small, fragile, honest, the kind of thing that doesn't survive everything, but had so far survived this.